Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping back into a time when justice was less about paperwork and more about, well, surviving the day. Imagine the village square in the pale light of dawn, mist curling low over cobblestones slick from last night's rain. You hear the clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing from somewhere close, though he's not making horseshoes today. He's preparing something far more sinister. You catch the scent of damp earth mixed with the metallic tang of hot iron, and already you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the heart of a medieval crowd, the sound of murmurs swelling into a kind of hungry chant. Everyone's here to witness a trial by ordeal. The concept's simple in the same way medieval dentistry was simple. Your fate hinges on a test designed to hurt you. The one we're watching tonight, boiling water. No, not the spa kind. The accused, let's call him Roderick, stands trembling by a cauldron large enough to bathe a sheep in. The water inside roils and spits like it's angry at being kept in one place. A priest reads a blessing over it, because nothing says fairness like a religious seal on third-degree burns. Your part in this? Well, you're the accused, and you're about to plunge your arm in up to the elbow to retrieve a small stone sitting somewhere at the bottom. Here's the fun rule: if your arm heals in 3 days without infection, you're innocent. If it festers, you're guilty. Historians still argue whether this was meant to truly divine God's judgment, or if it was just a clever way to rid communities of inconvenient people. As you stand there, the air feels heavier. You notice a child holding a wooden toy shaped like a knight, the little sword carved at an awkward angle, and you think about how generations grow up watching these public tests. The priest nods to the blacksmith, who removes the iron lid from the pot. Steam rushes upward in a violent hiss, stinging your eyes and turning the world into a blurry watercolor. The crowd leans in, breaths mingling with the fog. You've got 3 seconds to act, because lingering just makes it worse. Your hand dives into the liquid, and pain blooms instantly sharp and unforgiving, as though 100 hornets are burrowing under your skin. You fish blindly for the stone, the slick edges slipping under your fingertips, until you finally grip it and yank your arm free. Skin blisters white and angry. Someone in the crowd winces, but most lean forward, curious. They wrap your arm in linen, though wrap might be too generous. It's more like winding a strip of cloth someone's uncle brought from home. And now the wait begins. Over the next days, villagers pass by your hut, glancing in as if checking the ripeness of fruit. One quirky detail most people miss in some towns: the water for these ordeals was taken from a church's baptismal font, blessed and sometimes mixed with herbs meant to reveal truth. Whether those herbs were antiseptic or infection-inducing, well, that's where the scholarly debates heat up. Some argue this skewed results. Others think it didn't matter because outcomes were pre-decided anyway. By the morning of the 3rd day, your arm is, well, it's not winning any beauty contests. The priest inspects it in the same calm way one might inspect a loaf of bread for mold, and then he delivers the verdict: guilty. Which ironically, you'd have gotten whether the wound healed or not, because the person accusing you owns more land than you ever will. As you're led away, you pass that same child with the wooden knight. He's pretending to dip the figure's arm into an imaginary cauldron, laughing with another boy. The sight sticks in your mind. Justice here is both a ritual and a game. The trial by ordeal has done its job. It's entertained, reinforced authority, and reminded everyone that survival depends less on truth and more on spectacle. And in the corner of your mind, you can't help but think, if God's really judging through boiling water, He must have a strange sense of humor. You're not even back in your hut for a full day before the rumors start curling through the village like smoke. Guilty, they whisper, and each retelling seems to add another flourish. One woman claims you spat at the priest, another swears you muttered curses in Latin. You don't even know Latin. But in the Middle Ages, truth is elastic, especially when there's gossip to feed it. And gossip, unfortunately, has a punishment all its own, the Brank's iron tongue. It's a device that sounds almost poetic until you see it. Picture a metal framework shaped like the outline of a helmet, but made with the same loving craftsmanship you'd expect from someone building a mousetrap. It fits over your head snugly, not in a comforting winter hat way, but in a good luck scratching your nose way. The crown of it arches like a birdcage, and attached to the front is a long, thin metal plate shaped to slide into your mouth. The plate has a cruel secret, a small spiked stub right in the middle, perfectly placed to press against your tongue. That's the iron tongue. Once fitted, it doesn't just stop you from speaking, it punishes the very act of trying. Even the smallest movement turns the stub into a thorn in your mouth. And here's the quirky bit, some Branks had bells on them. Tiny little chimes so the whole street could hear you coming, like an ice cream truck from the ninth circle of hell. Historians still argue whether the Brank was truly about silencing harmful speech, or if it was more about public theater parading a scold through town for everyone to mock. Either way, you're marched out of your doorway with the frame clamped tight, the smell of cold iron filling your nose and the taste of rust spreading over your tongue. The strap digging into your jaw is leather stiff with age and cracked like parched earth. The villagers don't have to guess what's happening, they know. A group of women pause from washing clothes in the stream to watch you shuffle past. A boy tosses a clump of mud that lands squarely on your shoulder, and because you can't speak, you can't even curse at him. Which is ironic, since that's what you're accused of doing too much of. You feel the bell, yes, yours, has a bell jingle faintly with each step, a sound that would be charming if it weren't announcing your humiliation. In some towns, the walk could last hours, and every corner you turn brings fresh eyes and new jeers. You catch sight of the blacksmith again, leaning on his hammer. He nods slightly, pity amusement, before turning back to his forge. By the time they return you to your hut, your tongue is raw, where it's pressed against the spike, and your neck aches from holding still. You're allowed to speak again only once the brank is removed, but your mouth feels swollen words, thick and slow. And the worst part, you know the image of you in that ridiculous contraption will become the village's new favorite story. Some say branks were used mostly on women branded as scolds for anything from nagging to public argument. Others suggest men weren't immune either, especially those who insulted officials or spread dangerous rumors. The records aren't always clear, but one thing's certain, silence here isn't golden. It's enforced with iron and a bit of street theater. Later that night, as you lie on your straw mattress, you hear faint jingling from somewhere in the dark. Another scold is being walked through the square. You imagine them tasting the same rust, feeling the same helplessness, and you can't help but smirk just a little, knowing you've been part of an unspoken club no one volunteers for. By the next market day, you're trying to keep a low-profile hood pulled forward, hands buried in your sleeves, but the town has other plans. There's a ripple of laughter moving ahead of you in the crowd, the kind of sound that makes you instinctively check if your shoes come off or your tunic's inside out. Then you see him, a man stumbling through the main thoroughfare wearing what looks like a wooden barrel strapped around his torso. The drunkard's cloak. You've heard of it before, usually in tavern stories told with exaggerated hand gestures and too much ale. But here it is in real daylight, the top and bottom of the barrel cut away, so the man's head and legs stick out the sides, rubbing against his arms as he struggles to balance its weight. It sways when he moves, making him wobble like a rolling keg with feet. A leather strap crosses his chest to keep the thing from slipping, though it's not exactly secure. At one point, he has to shuffle sideways to keep from tripping over the hem. The punishment's purpose is simple public humiliation. If you've been caught drunk in public, especially more than once, you might find yourself parading through town in this portable prison. And because medieval people were masters of turning shame into performance, the crowd loves it. Some of them call out mock toasts, raising invisible cups. One man offers him a real drink only to pull it away at the last second. You hear one woman snort, "Best dressed in the market today," which earns her a round of chuckles. Children trail behind him, pretending to stagger their tiny feet, kicking up dust. Here's a quirky fact. Most folks overlook some drunkards' cloaks were painted with slogans or crude drawings, making sure everyone knew exactly why the wearer was there. Others were left plain, but still reeked of the last contents they held: ale brine, sometimes fish, so the humiliation came with an added layer of olfactory misery. Historians still argue whether the cloak was strictly for alcohol-related offenses, or if towns used it more broadly to punish disorderly behavior. A few sources even suggest it was occasionally repurposed for people who didn't pay debts. Imagine owing taxes and winding up in a fish-smelling barrel. The man in front of you, let's call him Willem, catches your eye for a moment. There's a flicker of recognition, and you realize he remembers your prank walk. His lips twitch into something between a grimace and a grin, like he's saying, "Well, we've both had our turn in the spotlight." The procession winds its way past the stalls selling dried herbs and smoked eels. At one point, Willem stumbles into a pile of turnips, scattering them like startled rabbits. The stallholder waves her hands dramatically, shouting about cursed fools and ruined produce, but the truth is, she's enjoying the show as much as anyone. The town crier follows behind, ringing his bell and announcing Willem's offense in a voice that's far too cheerful. Each time he calls out, the barrel bounces slightly against Willem's hips, a dull wooden thud that almost makes you wince in sympathy. Almost. By the time they reach the far edge of town, the crowd thins, the laughter fades, and Willem is left to trudge alone under the weight of the cloak. The straps creak with each step, and you wonder if the punishment's real sting isn't the public shame, but the slow ache in the shoulders and lower back pain that lingers long after the crowd's forgotten your name. That night, you picture yourself inside the same barrel shuffling through the streets. It's a ridiculous image, but you can't help feeling the undercurrent of threat. The Middle Ages are an expert at turning anyone into the day's entertainment, and you're painfully aware you've already been a headliner twice. The market square is still buzzing the next morning, but not from trade. A wooden frame has been set up right in the center, and the air hums with the giddy anticipation of people who know they're about to get a free show. The pillory is back in use. You've seen it before from a distance, a rough timber structure, two planks hinged together with holes carved for a neck and wrists. But this is your first close look. The wood is dark from years of weather, and hands with faint grooves worn where countless prisoners' skin pressed against it. The hinges creak as the executioner, though here his role is more stage manager, lifts the top plank. The man being escorted up is trying to look brave, though the flush in his cheeks betrays him. His offense: officially theft of bread, unofficially mocking the mayor during a feast, which in this town is as dangerous as trying to milk a bull. He steps onto the small platform and the crowd leans in. You can smell onions and damp wool from the bodies pressing around you. They guide his neck and wrists into place, then drop the top plank with a solid clunk. The wood settles against his skin, and a large iron padlock snaps shut. He's now the centerpiece of the morning's entertainment. Here's a mainstream historical fact: pillories weren't always just for humiliation, they could also be dangerous. While townsfolk were officially supposed to throw harmless food scraps or shout insults, they often escalated to rocks, rotten vegetables, even dead animals. The line between mockery and assault was flexible. And here's your quirky tidbit for the day. Some medieval records mention flower pillories, where people were encouraged to throw scented herbs and petals instead, usually for minor or fashionable offenses. Whether those actually happened, or were just satirical jabs in court documents, historians still argue. Back in our square, there are no petals. A boy lobs a turnip at the prisoner's shoulder, grinning when it hits with a wet thud. Someone else tosses a handful of cold porridge that slides down the man's tunic like a slow, sticky slug. A woman calls out a rhyme about thieves' hands being lighter than air but heavier than chains, and the crowd laughs. The prisoner tries to keep his eyes on the ground, but it doesn't help. The position forces his shoulders forward, his back aching, his neck stiff. The wood bites into the soft skin of his wrists every time he shifts. You wonder what's worse, the insults or the slow creep of physical pain as the hours pass. A drunk with ale on his breath stumbles close and breathes some joke into the man's ear, then spits on the ground in front of him. Two children take turns daring each other to poke him with a stick. The guards make no move to stop them. They're as much part of the performance as anyone else. By midday, the sun has shifted just enough to bake the wooden frame, making it smell faintly of warm pine. The prisoner's face is shiny with sweat, and his lips are dry. Someone finally tosses him a cup of water, though it's mostly to watch him struggle to drink without bending his head properly. When the lock is finally undone in the late afternoon, he stumbles away stiff and red-marked his dignity somewhere back in the square. The wood closes again with that same heavy clunk, waiting for the next unlucky soul. You walk past it on your way home, and the faint smell of rotting vegetables clings to the air. You catch yourself glancing at the size of the wrist holes, too small for comfort, but just big enough for possibility. The realization makes you quicken your step. In this town, you've learned the pillory isn't just for thieves. It's for anyone the crowd's in the mood to watch squirm. The river looks harmless from a distance, silver skin wrinkling under a lazy breeze, reeds whispering like they're practicing secrets, but you know better. The chill coming off the water feels like a warning pressed right against your bones. People say the worst punishments are sharp and quick. The river prefers its lessons slow, wet, and full of audience participation. You shuffle forward, ankles bound, wrists crossed and tied tight with a rope that smells like tar and old fish. A man in a wool cap tests the knot with a tug that makes your fingers tingle. "Don't worry," he says with the calm of someone who will absolutely not be in the river today. "We'll reel you back." You're not reassured. The line isn't thick enough for confidence. It's exactly the thickness used by people who value thrift over your continued existence. The crowd arranges itself along the bank, like a semicircle of seabirds' heads, tilted eyes bright. You recognize faces: Turnip Kid from the pillory crowd, the woman who applauded your brank walk, Willem of the drunkard's cloak, now blessedly barrel-free and enjoying a brief sabbatical from public carpentry. A few folks have brought stools. One man is gnawing an apple down to a heart-shaped core and looks genuinely moved by your plight, or just impressed by the entertainment value per minute. Hard to tell with audiences. This is ordeal by water cousin to that boiling business you still feel in your arm. Here the logic is tidy. To the point of absurdity, water is pure and pure things reject impurity. So if you float, you're guilty. If you sink, you're innocent. You'd prefer the version where innocence doesn't require drowning, but somehow that memo missed the committee. Historians still argue whether this logic was deeply believed or retrofitted later to justify a cruel bit of theater. Either way, The river does not care about theological footnotes. They walk you onto a narrow wooden plank that juts over the shallows. It creaks in the weary way of wood that has hosted too many stories like yours. A priest mutters a blessing, tracing a cross in the air that glitters briefly with reflected sunlight. You catch the scent of the water, mud, pondweed, cold stone. It's not a bad smell, just indifferent. You'd toast to indifference if your hands weren't currently tied. A hush settles, then hands at your back and you go in. The water smacks your skin like a flat palm, and the cold runs up your spine as if someone poured winter down your shirt. You sink at first, not dramatically, just the way heavy things prefer to move. Your lungs shout for planning, which is unhelpful advice right now. The rope goes taut, jerking your waist, and you bob back up like a cork with opinions. The crowd leans forward. There's a ripple of disappointed sounds as you stubbornly float near the surface. You kick a little with bound feet, trying to angle your body so you don't inhale a reed. A frog watches from a lily pad, perfectly judgmental. A mainstream historical fact slips in as you waver. Swimming a suspected person, especially for witchcraft, was far more common in the early modern period, but ordeals by water existed earlier, especially before the church formally discouraged trial by ordeal in the 13th century. The practice lingers, though, in small places and suspicious minds. Villages don't always read council decrees with the enthusiasm councils would prefer. And even when the church said no more towns, sometimes heard less paperwork. You bob there, teeth beginning to chatter, listening to your own breath stutter. The rope handler gives a careful pull, guiding you toward the deeper channel, like a fisherman coaxing a stubborn catch. Need the proper test, he mutters. Proper sounds, ominously close to colder. Someone in the audience calls, if they float, they're up to something. Another answers, if they sink, they're too heavy with sins. At least the theology is consistent, you lose both ways. You try to laugh and only manage a coughing fit. Not your best timing for stand-up. Here's a quirky tidbit for your troubles. In a few places, they slipped a wooden cross into the rope, or pinned one to the suspect's clothing, believing the symbol would call down fair judgment, or at least keep the rope from snapping at the worst possible moment. Others tied a knot called the truth hitch, a special looping pattern that a few old sailors swore never slipped if the person beneath deserved saving. Whether that was piety or practical rope lore, historians still argue. Knots rarely file paperwork. The first real dunk comes sudden. A shove on your shoulder spins you sideways, and the river closes over your head like a door slamming in a storm. Sound turns to muffled thunder. You open your eyes to a green world of waving stems and drifting silt, the surface a wavery mirror above you. Your chest grips itself tight. The rope holds firm, hands on the bank pull. You rise, burst into air, and noise cough water in a glittering spray and blink at a sky that feels too bright for your situation. The crowd exclaims like they've witnessed a fun trick at a wedding. You want to propose a new game called Everyone Goes Home Now, but your tongue is busy shivering, another dunk longer. The kind where your thoughts begin to stack in useless order, firelight, the Brank's sour iron Willem's barrel thumping the pillory locks clunk, your arms white blisters a child's night. Your vision narrows until the river is just cold, and the cold is everything. They haul you up again, and your voice makes a sound you don't recognize. Somewhere on the bank, an old woman nods, as if this proves something she's known all along about you, about rivers, about how truth works, only when the audience approves of it. You catch fragments of rules as the rope handler and the village reeve confer. 3 immersions, one says. 2, says another. Until the sign is clear, says a third, which sounds like an excuse to keep going until someone is satisfied or someone stops breathing. You wonder about signs now, how much of justice is just the looking for a sign and being clever enough to see it in whatever happens. You try to grin and your lips stick to your teeth with river cold. Comedy note to self: when the setup is hypothermia, the punchline is a blanket. A young apprentice with a face full of hope calls out that he heard of a town upriver where suspects were weighed against a thick Bible, if lighter guilty, if heavier innocent. Someone else scoffs, says that's a fable, says people just like stories that fit on market days. The reeve waves them silent and points at you. Back down you go the river, swallowing your protest, like an unfriendly innkeeper swallowing your coin. Underwater time stretches into a long hallway with no doors. Your cheeks burn with cold, an odd contradiction that worries the part of your mind still capable of science. When they yank you up, the world drips off you in beads. You hear singing, oddly, no, not singing. The priest is reciting a psalm, the cadence steady, as if rhythm can tame water. For a moment, comfort sneaks in. You could fall asleep here, shivering, head on the rope river, rocking you like a cradle built by winter itself. You shake it off. Not tonight, cradle. Someone declares you float too easily to be innocent. Someone else is uneasy, says the river is turbulent today, and currents play tricks. Historians still argue whether bystanders truly believed the water rejected the wicked, or whether they recognized a staged spectacle cloaked in holy language. The answer unhelpfully seems to be sometimes yes, sometimes no. A community can believe deeply at noon and knowingly wink by supper. They drag you to the bank at last, rolling you onto the pebbles where heat is a polite rumor. The rope bites your waist like teeth. A woman you don't know appears with a rough wool blanket and tucks it around your shoulders with the brisk tenderness people reserve for stray animals they plan to return to the lane. She gives you a cup of something, hot broth or courage, maybe both, and says, "Breathe now." You do, and it hurts in a relieving way. A child points at your chattering jaw and laughs, then does an impression of your dunking that is, to be fair, unsettlingly accurate. Joke count, you're at least 3 in your head, and 1 unintentional in public. Verdict time. The reeve clears his throat in that official style that makes everything sound carved in oak. He announces that your floating shows a troubled conscience, but mercy recommends a lesser penalty, public confession, a fine a day in the pillory. The crowd murmurs a sound like bees deciding whether to swarm. You think of the pillory's wood, warm by noon, and decide that warm plus humiliation beats cold plus drowning, which is a breakthrough in your personal ethics. As they untie your wrists, the rope handler leans close and murmurs not unkindly, "Sometimes people sink. We don't always pull fast enough." He looks toward the water, eyes narrowed as if the river owes him an apology it will never give. The priest makes one last sign of the cross over the surface, and the breeze scuffs the ripples into a pattern you'll remember at night when you try to sleep. The pattern says water keeps its own counsel. On the walk back, Willem falls into step beside you. "You floated," he says. "I knew you would. You've got that sort of luck." You ask what sort that might be, teeth clicking. "The sort that gets you chosen for the good parts," he says, with the kindness of someone who has worn a barrel in public and lived to flirt with irony. He offers you a sip from a flask. You hesitate, then take it. It tastes like something that used to be apples and now has opinions. Behind you, the river returns to its ordinary day reed song gull bark surface, bright as melted coin. It doesn't remember you. The town will for a week or two, and then only as a shape in a story told over bread. and occasionally a ridiculous barrel. But your body will remember the way cold marches into the joints and claims them, the way a rope against the waist becomes both leash and lifeline, the way a crowd transforms doubt into consensus with nothing but breath and expectation. You pass the square where the pillory stands, its wrist holes dark ovals against sun-browned wood. You imagine yourself back there, and for once, it's almost comforting. Sturdy ground, predictable insults, turnips at terminal velocity, you know the drill. Compared to a river with no face, a plank with a lock feels like a familiar handshake. When you finally reach your door, you leave wet footprints that look briefly like quotation marks in the dust. They fade as you cross the threshold. You sit blanket steaming faintly in the dull light and think about the strange arithmetic of survival here float, and your guilty sink and your innocent live, and you owe a fine drown and you make a point no one wants to write down. Somewhere in that math, you're still breathing. Tonight, that's the only calculation that matters. The morning after the river trial, your limbs feel like sacks of damp grain, each step a reminder that cold water has a way of hanging on inside you long after you've left it. You try to distract yourself with small errands, mending a strap, sweeping the hearth. But by mid-morning, a sound drifts through the open window that pulls you toward the square again. Not the rowdy clatter of a market day, but a curious mix of laughter and music, or not quite music. You follow the sound until you see the source. A man shuffling along in a contraption that looks like it fell halfway between a medieval instrument and a practical joke. His chin is jammed into the mouthpiece of a long metal tube, with keys and holes along its length, the kind you'd expect a minstrel to carry if a minstrel were also serving a sentence. This is the shame flute. The effect is immediate. The crowd follows him like he's a traveling performer. Only the tune is a flat, tuneless wheeze caused by every forced breath. His fingers are shackled to the metal's sides, fixed in place over the holes, so that he can't actually play anything. He's been accused of theft grain from a mill, someone whispers. And in this town, that earns you the walk of the fool. Here's your mainstream historical fact: shame flutes were sometimes used in German-speaking regions during the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, mostly for musicians who played poorly, failed at their duties, or otherwise embarrassed their patrons. But the idea spread to other petty offenses, morphing from professional discipline into pure ridicule. And the quirky tidbit, some were made to look like oversized recorders, others like clarinets or flageolets. A few even had inscriptions mocking the wearer engraved right into the brass. The man in front of you has spielt schlecht, and stielt plays badly, and steals etched along the side, though you're not sure whether the plays badly part is accurate or just added for fun. Historians still argue whether these punishments were ever meant to reform the guilty, or if they were simply a low-budget street theater public catharsis dressed as justice. You lean toward the latter, especially when you notice the way people exaggerate their laughter each time the man's breath squeals through the tube. The sound itself is absurd, a cross between a goose in distress and someone trying to blow dust out of a bottle. Children mimic it instantly, puffing into imaginary flutes as they trot alongside. One older woman claps to the rhythm, making it worse. Every step jangles the chain between the man's ankles, a syncopated counterpoint to the metallic wheeze. The guards guiding him don't look particularly stern. They're half smiling themselves, which tells you all you need to know about the seriousness of the event. At one point, the prisoner stumbles, and the flute jerks upward, making a sudden sharp squeak that startles a nearby dog into barking. The crowd erupts with laughter again. You notice that the device isn't as heavy as the Branks frame you wore, but it's designed with equal precision for maximum awkwardness. The mouthpiece forces the jaw open, drying the lips. The straps around the head dig at the temples. And of course, the prisoner can't say a word without turning it into another ridiculous honk. The parade loops through the busier streets past the baker's stall and the weaver's porch. People who didn't catch the start join in along the way, drawn by the sound. One man in a feathered hat yells, "Play us something cheerful," which sends the children into fits. You catch the prisoner's eyes for a moment. There's no anger there. Just the tired knowledge that this will follow him long after the device is gone. When they finally unstrap the shame flute at the edge of town, the man's jaw works soundlessly for a moment, like he's forgotten how to hold his mouth without it. His wrists are rubbed raw where the shackles kept him from moving his hands, and then without a word, he slips into the side street and disappears, leaving only the echo of that strange, tuneless wheeze hanging in the air. As you turn to leave, you catch yourself thinking about instruments, how they can charm, soothe, or inspire. But in the hands of medieval justice, even music can be bent into a mockery. You hum a note under your breath, and for a second, you swear you can still hear the flute answering back. You don't plan to talk much today. After the shame flute's wheeze and the river's chilly logic, your voice feels like a risky investment. But the street has other ideas and words, yours, other people's, are currency in this town. It takes only a comment about the price of onions, a raised eyebrow, and someone's delicate pride to snap. The word scold lands on you like a pebble flicked at a cat. You've worn worse. Still, you know what that word can buy iron. They bring the scold's bridle from a chest that creaks like an old confession. At first glance, it looks almost ceremonial. The metal curving in tidy arcs, a loop for the crown of your head cheek frames, shaped to hold your face the way a stern aunt holds a teacup, firm, precise, humorless. But the contraption's center tells its truth, a short plate meant for your mouth with a small protrusion on the inside. No more than a blunt thorn aligned exactly where your tongue will sit. Not sharp enough to tear unless you fight it, but insistent enough to teach you good posture from the lips inward. A beetle with winter in his beard holds it up for the crowd to see. Bridle for a scold, he announces like a merchant hawking wares. The words carry the weight of habit. In Scotland and parts of England, you've heard this device is as familiar as the pillory used on women, tagged as nags on men labeled brawlers, on anyone whose mouth outruns their status. Mainstream fact. For the day, the scold's bridle or branks appears in records from the 16th and 17th centuries, especially in Scottish burghs, where councils kept a tidy list of who wore it and why slander, brawling, cursing, refusing to hold one's tongue at market. The paperwork outlives the pain. Quirky tidbit while we're here, some bridles were decorated with little faces or animal snouts, turning the wearer into a kind of walking mask, a pig's nose for a gossip, a donkey's grin for a boaster. Others sported bells and dangling plates that clinked with every cautious step, so you announced yourself like a one-person parade no one asked for. And yes, sometimes a brass plaque hung under the chin with your crime engraved in neat letters. Think of it as medieval subtitling. Open the beetle says gently, which is a funny word choice when the object in question abolishes that very action. You part your lips. The plate slides in cool and tasting faintly of ash and old vinegar. The protrusion finds your tongue with embarrassing accuracy. Your eyes water from the pressure. It isn't agony PG-13, remember, but it is an intimacy you didn't consent to. Leather straps loop behind your head. The crown band settles over your hair. Someone checks the side hinges as if tuning a lute. The padlock at the back clicks closed. It's a small sound, but you've learned small sounds can be the whole story. The pillory's clunk. The rope's taut whisper, the shame flute's honk. They walk you into the square by a leading chain, more for theater than security. Each step encourages you to keep your head steady, because any nod or shake rubs tongue against stub, stub against tongue, a little duet you'd rather not perform. You discover quickly that sighing is the safest exhale. Laughter is a hazard. Sneezing is a quest for sainthood. A dog trots alongside, reevaluates you as not food, and wanders away, which honestly stings more than you expect. You used to be crowd-pleasing. People you know and people who swear they know you gather at a polite distance the way they cluster around a street juggler or a sunny patch in winter. A few note with satisfaction that your words have finally met their match. Others look uncomfortable, as if they've accidentally gone to a play where the actors can see the audience. The blacksmith wipes his hands and watches expression neutral as a wall. Willem of the Barrel Cloak gives you a sympathetic half bow. The circuit claims us all. The town crier looks disappointed. There's no bell on your model. He's a man who appreciates a brand asset. The beadle guides you to a bench and secures the leading chain to a post. The sun warms the top band of the bridle. The inside stays cool, stubborn as a pebble in a shoe. You let your eyelids fall to half-mast and focus on breathing through your nose, slow, careful, like an ASMR tutorial titled, "Inhale Around the Iron." You catalog the sounds: cartwheels, thunking over a rut, a baker's peel, scraping a hen announcing her egg as if she invented chickens. And there, layered under it all, a memory of the river lapping at your ears. Turns out silence and water share a vocabulary. A woman approaches with a basket of apples and offers one by holding it up to your lips. You can't bite without comedy. She seems to realize this halfway through the gesture and blushes. "Sorry," she murmurs, muscle memory. She places the apple on the bench beside you, like an offering to a small god of restraint. Joke 1, you are not accepting worshippers at this time, but donations of sliced fruit are encouraged. A boy tries to peer up under the chin plate to see the tongue stub. His mother pulls him back with a whisper about manners, then sneaks a look herself because curiosity does not obey parenting. Historians still argue whether the bridle's tongue plate commonly had spikes sharp enough to pierce, or whether many examples we see today are later improvements designed by moralizers or imaginative smiths. Museum pieces vary. Some are wicked, some are merely obstinate. The debate stretches to frequency too. Was the bridle a staple of town discipline, or an edge case punishment inflated by lurid broadsheets and modern fascination? Records say regular but not ubiquitous, which is exactly the sort of answer that keeps arguments nicely alive. Time passes in the slow, pourable way it does when you can't fidget. Your shoulders learn a new vocabulary of tiny adjustments. Your tongue becomes a project manager, negotiating every micro movement with the plate's unyielding opinions. When a fly lands on the bridge of your nose, you practice stillness, like a monk who took vows specifically about insect diplomacy. Joke 2. The fly, unimpressed, files a complaint about the lack of refreshments. A clerk from the Burg Council stops to inspect the lock, notes your name on a small slate, and jots the hour. Bureaucracy, the one instrument medieval towns play in tune. He recites for anyone listening that your scolding consisted of loud contradiction in the market accusations of cheating and an unflattering remark about the Reeves haircut. You consider defending your opinion. His fringe really is ambitious for his face shape, but the bridle edits your commentary down to a civilized silence. Somewhere a barber gasps at lost content. After a while, minutes an hour, the beetle returns to begin the walk. The leading chain's short length forces you to take measured steps. People line the lane, observing the contraption's tidy geometry. Someone asks if it hurts. The beetle answers honestly, only if they insist on proving it. It's not the worst summary of half the punishments you've seen. You wave a little with your eyes at Willem as you pass. He mimes, zipping his mouth, and then remembering your current hardware mimes, locking it and throwing away the key. You both smile, tiny, careful. Joke 3, if only keys respected performance art, you'd be free already. You pass the pillory vacant today, its wood warming in the noon light. You feel an absurd pang of nostalgia for its straightforward meanness, stand endure, get pelted, leave. The bridal is subtler, a philosophy lesson you didn't ask for. Speech is power. Take speech, borrow power. You remember the shame flute's wheeze and think how both devices turn mouths into jokes, the flute by exaggeration, the bridal by subtraction. Different routes to the same laugh track. A man from a neighboring village sidles up and volunteers a rumor in his town. They attach a bridal wearer to the cucking stool and dunk them if they roll their eyes. He grins like he told the best pub story. The beetle snorts, whether in disbelief or envy is unclear. Historians still argue whether these punishments were routinely combined, or if we're hearing the medieval equivalent of someone bragging their school had the strictest principle. Your eyes stay forward. Your tongue votes no on experimentation. A breeze lifts, carrying the river's faint chill up the street. The top band cools again, and for a second the metal smells like rain. You note the contrast. The bridal wants stillness, the river wanted surrender, the pillory demanded endurance, the shame flute insisted on spectacle. 4 versions of the same message. Your body is a notice board, and the town writes on whatever space is free. At last, back by the bench, the beetle unlocks the padlock. The leather straps whisper free. The mouthplate slides out with an oddly respectful withdrawal, like a guest leaving early to beat the weather. Your tongue sits stunned large in your mouth, as if it needs to relearn where it lives. Saliva returns like an old friend who brings tea. You swallow, and the whole room's square sky pigeons applauds quietly in your inner ear. Words come slow at first, as if shy. You say thank you because habit is strong, and because the beetle's workday looks heavy. He nods. Next time he says, not unkindly, nod with your eyes. You sit for a moment, touching the faint marks, the straps left at your temples. The apple waits, patient. You bite it, and the sweetness feels extravagant after metal and breath counting. A few onlookers drift away, interest satisfied. One old woman lingers. My sister wore one, she says, voice filigreed with years. Sang to herself in it, not with the mouth, with the throat. Said it helped her feel larger than the iron. She shrugs. We do what we can. You nod. In your head, you try a hum, not aloud, just memory, and the tune from the shame flute answers for half a second, both of you inaudible and relieved. You stand. The world tilts toward errands and ordinary irritations. A child waves. You wave back with your whole hand, luxurious in its freedom. The blacksmith raises 2 fingers off his hammer in a salute that reads as, see you again. And you hope he's wrong, but appreciate the solidarity of a man who knows the weight of metal. The reeve passes fringe resolute, and you let the critique float gently out of your mind like a paper boat. No need to test the river again today. As you walk, your tongue feels like a cautious animal peeking from its den, testing the air, deciding the weather has turned. You promise it moderation at least until supper. Maybe you will practice eye nods, learn 3 useful shrugs, cultivate a repertoire of eyebrow prose. Words are wonderful, you remind yourself. But sometimes silence keeps the body out of the hardware aisle. Still, you know the ledger isn't closed. The town keeps its props polished. The bridle will rest in its chest. The pillory will wait in the square. The stool will creak by the river. The shame flute will wheeze when called. And you keep walking, apple in hand, tongue intact. Humor dented, but operational. If survival here is a craft, You're getting handier by the day. You almost smile at that, careful though. Let the joke land softly. Let the afternoon pass without bells. It's the splash you hear first, not the friendly slap of a fish breaking the surface, but the flat whump of something heavy meeting water in a way that promises discomfort. The sound comes again, then laughter rises from the far end of the square, where the river curls in like a guest who never quite leaves the party. You drift toward it, curiosity tugging you along. There it is, the cucking stool. A long wooden beam juts from a simple frame, balanced like a seesaw. At one end is a chair more like a boxy crate with slats than anything you'd want to relax in. At the other end, a counterweight and rope pulley, all of it creaking with the smug confidence of a device that's been part of village life for generations. A woman sits strapped into the chair skirts, hitched up to avoid dragging in the mud hair plastered to her forehead. She's dripping from the last dunk, glaring at the reeve, as if she'd like to use the stool on him instead. Her crime, you overhear, is public nuisance, which in this place could mean anything from quarreling too loudly to selling watered beer. Mainstream historical fact cucking stools were used across parts of Britain and Europe, often for women accused of being scolds, brewers selling poor ale, or people guilty of petty disorder. In some towns, they started as dry shaming seats displayed in the marketplace, later evolving into dunking devices when water access made things more theatrical. Quirky tidbit. In certain records, the stool wasn't always by a river. It might be positioned over a cesspit or muddy pond for extra olfactory insult. Whether that was routine or just a local innovation is something historians still argue about, often with a wince. The beetle hauls on the rope, and the chair rises in a slow arc. The crowd leans forward, some shielding their eyes from the sun glinting off the water. The woman's feet dangle above the surface for a tantalizing moment, giving her time to yell something about the reeve's mother. Then down she goes. A splash swallows her shout. You can't help noticing the water's different from the river ordeal you endured. This is shallower, muddier, with reeds that look more like eavesdroppers than witnesses. The smell has a flat green note, stagnant rather than fresh. She comes up, coughing, hair, slicked back skirt clinging to her knees. The beetle cranks her back over the bank, the chair dripping like a wet rag. People cheer as though she's just completed a heroic dive. A boy tosses her a sprig of mint, mockingly suggesting it might help with the smell. She responds by spitting water in his direction, earning herself another dunk. As you watch, you realize the punishment isn't about endurance so much as repetition. Each immersion resets the humiliation, and each retrieval offers a stage for fresh heckling. The stool creaks, the rope squeals, the counterweight thuds on the bank. A man beside you mutters that in his home village the chair was mounted on wheels so the condemned could be paraded through town before the dunking. Another says his cousin once saw 3 people dunked in the same day for arguing over bread prices. Neither story sounds impossible. Historians still argue whether the cucking stool genuinely reformed behavior or if it simply reinforced the community's power over the individual. Looking at the crowd, faces bright with anticipation, you lean toward the latter. After several rounds, the reeve signals the end. The woman is unstrapped, shivering but upright, and she walks away without looking back, water dripping in her wake like punctuation marks. The stool sits idle, its shadow stretching long in the late afternoon sun. You pass it on your way home, the wooden slats still damp. For a moment, you picture yourself in the chair skirt or no skirt, it doesn't matter. The thought sends a small chill up your spine, even though the day is warm. In a town where public punishment is theater, the cucking stool is slapstick, splash, laugh, repeat. You keep walking, telling yourself you'll stay dry. But you've been here long enough to know that in this place, no one's seat is ever permanently empty. By late afternoon, the square has shifted moods again from slapstick splashes to something quieter, heavier, the way a room changes when someone pulls the curtains half closed. The crowd thins at the edges, but the people who remain have that still intent, look like they're watching a candle gutter just to see if it pulls through. You recognize that look. It's the same one from the cauldron day, from the pillory's long noon, from the moment the shame flute squealed its first unwilling note. The town is hungry for a lesson, not a laugh. You drift closer, careful that ASMR hush running along your skin like a soft brush step, breathe, listen. In the middle of the ring of onlookers stands a frame covered by a cloth. The Reeves fringe appears brave as ever. He announces in a voice trained for stairwells and sermons that a traitor has been caught, an officer who sold town secrets to a rival lord, took bribes, misled courts. The word traitor is a match in dry straw. People murmur, and the murmur has teeth. You feel the shift in your own body. There are punishments meant for noise barrels and flutes and dunks, and then there are punishments meant for memory. Today leans toward memory. The beetle pulls the cloth away to reveal not a machine this time, but a panel painted and gold-leafed propped on a stout easel. Its colors glint the way a river catches late sun, deep carmine reds, blues like night glass, a shine that's almost a whisper. The painting shows the story you've heard in a dozen versions, a corrupt judge named Sisamnes, condemned by King Cambyses for taking bribes, outer coat removed as a lesson, and his judicial chair reupholstered, shall we say, with a reminder. Next scene, Sisamnes's son sits on that same chair, the message pressed into the wood. Mainstream historical fact. At the end of the 15th century, Bruges magistrates commissioned the painter Gérard David to create a pair of large panels of this exact story, the judgment of Cambyses, as a warning to judges about corruption. They weren't hung in a dungeon. They were displayed where officials worked. The moral wasn't whispered. It was backlit by daylight pointed straight at the people with pens. The Reeve explains the painting like a tutor reciting a textbook in church. You watch the crowd watch the pictures. Some swallow, some nod. A few children glance away. You can feel the lesson pressed hard enough to leave an imprint. Justice works best. The message goes when judges remember what chairs are for and what they can become. The prisoner today, iron-bound at wrists and elbows, stands off to the side, flanked by two guards. He's not a judge, not even close. He kept records, made lists, found errors in people's favor, and then found them again after a coin changed hands. But the town has borrowed the legend as a template. Sometimes a story is a tool you keep sharp. Historians still argue whether actual medieval towns ever lined chairs with the literal remains of anyone. The phrase, "let's not test this at home," flickers politely across your mind. Plenty of chronicles posture. Far fewer provide receipts. But the threat, the pageantry of the threat that's as real as the Reeves fringe. The beetle raises a strip of dyed leather. He binds it around the accused's arm. "We will mark what was taken," he says, and heads turn some away, some closer. There is to be no spectacle of tearing, nothing read, nothing loud. This will be punishment by symbol, by theater. The outermost layer of his cloak is cut away in long, deliberate bands, leaving a patchwork of undertunic showing through. A tailor steps forward, shears gleaming, and snips the ribbons of outer cloth free. They flutter like flags of surrender. Joke one somewhere, a very strict fashion house just took notes. The crowd exhales a small sound. Even those who arrived expecting uglier drama register the point. The officer's dignity, his visible status, slips to the ground, piece by piece, neat pile on the platform, like discarded promises. You see the logic. Skin is identity. Clothing, too, is a kind of skin, the public version. Remove it, and the person inside can't pretend. The town loves this kind of math ritual that does not technically break the rules, but makes its argument with undeniable tidiness. The Reeve has found the border between PG-13 and nightmare, and is tiptoeing along it with the finesse of a cat on a fence. The panel shines again when someone shifts and your eyes snag on a detail. In David's painting, the judge's face isn't distorted into villainy. It's almost ordinary, the way guilt so often is quiet, administratively neat. You think of your own brushes with the town's devices, the Brank's cool insistence on silence, the shame flute's silly tyranny, the river's chilly vote. Each punished body was asked to teach something to the watchers. Today, the lesson is aimed upward: don't sell justice like onions at market. A clerk reads out the ledger of bribes numbers clicking like dice. A woman you recognize, the one who offered you an apple with the bridle on, shakes her head and mutters that vinegar and honey both look the same if you're counting jars in the dark. Joke too, she'd do well in branding. The blacksmith stands at the back, arms crossed, expression made of nail heads and anvil edges. Beside him, Willem of the Barrel gives a soft, approving like a critic at a play whose ending he predicted at intermission. Then comes the quirky tidbit tucked into the Reeve's speech like a decorative knot. In some towns, they say the ribbons cut from a corrupt official's cloak were stitched into a banner and hung in the courthouse, a warning in fabric form. In others, a strip might be nailed to the judge's bench, far less dramatic than legends claim, but pointed enough to goose a conscience each morning. Whether this ever happened regularly or survived mostly as civic folklore, historians still argue pencils wagging, sleeves rolled. The officer is turned to face the painting. He glances once, twice, and then looks down at the pile of cloth. You can practically feel the calculation in him: this could be worse. This might yet become worse. The crowd senses it too, that toppling edge where justice could tip from symbol into something bloodier. Inside your own ribs, a little drumbeat: don't escalate. The town doesn't need that today. You remember the cold intelligence of the river, the way it kept its own counsel. People are not rivers. People take suggestions from stories. The Reeve clears his throat, oak-carved sound, and declares the verdict. The officer is banished from his post, fined, painfully given a pilgrimage itinerary, as if piety can be measured in blisters, and required to stand one market day each week beneath the panel, while reciting that he sold trust, and now buys it back pebble by pebble with humility. If he fails, the town reserves sterner examples, and the way he says examples makes a few necks in the back row draw in like turtles. A murmur that isn't quite approval, isn't quite disappointment, moves through the ring. People want closure in a box with a bow. The Middle Ages excels at bows made of rope. Today, it offers ribbon made of cloth and story. You're oddly grateful. The guard unties the officer, whose shoulders seem newly visible without the stiff outer layer. He stoops, picks up one strip of his former cloak, and hands it to the beadle. It's an awkward, careful motion, like returning a borrowed book you claim you didn't crease. The beadle nods. The tailor gathers the rest. There's talk of a small banner hung where officials sign writs. Civic decor with teeth. A child points from the panel to the officer and back again, working out the algebra of consequence. His mother whispers something that sounds like, "Remember this next time you're tempted to bargain with sister in the breadline," which is either adorable or the beginning of an ambitious parenting strategy. Joke 3. If the kid starts quoting Bruges case law at bedtime, I'm not taking the blame. As people drift away, you linger. The light does that late-day honey thing on the panel's gilded border, and for a heartbeat the painted fabric looks almost soft, the way paint loves to pretend a texture. You think of all the chairs in town, the council bench, the clerk's stool, the oak settle in the church porch, and imagine each with a tiny whispering plaque, "Sit straight." This place adores plaques, real or imagined. It adores warnings dressed as art even more. Historians still argue whether medieval punishments leaned more toward reform or deterrence, and whether the spectacular ones were daily reality or highlight reels preserved by obsessed scribes with a flair for drama. Standing here, you decide the argument misses something vital. Punishment is always also about audience. The pillory requires throwers. The river requires watchers. The bridle requires a lane of neighbors who will not look away. Today, the painting required eyes ready to connect a story from Persia to a clerk with inky fingers. The audience supplied the bridge. On your walk home, you pass the pillory, peaceful in its idleness, as if butter wouldn't melt in its wrist holes. The cucking stool's shadow grazes the bank. Somewhere a flute, blessedly not made of shame, practices scales that wander before finding their way. You grin to yourself and hum along very quietly because you and your tongue have a detente. From a cottage, laughter pops some joke about the Reeves' hair, which you decline to repeat out loud for legal reasons, and also due to recent hardware experience. You pause at your own doorway, touch the latch, and look back toward the square. The panel will sleep in the council hall tonight, its lesson folded in the dark like a stern bedtime story. Maybe tomorrow it will shine again. Maybe someone will run a fingertip over the gold leaf and feel for a second the faintest grit, the way regret clings to even the smoothest finish. Inside your hearth blinks to life. The room smells of wood smoke, wool, and a stubborn sprig of mint you forgot on the table. You sit easing your sore shoulder. The river is still in there, cool as anything, and you think about skins, cloth, skin, social skin, the kind you don't name. You think about how the town sheds and renews them, how stories stick and how they peel away. Somewhere a judge's chair is just a chair. Somewhere else it isn't. Sit straight, you tell yourself, and you do. The night agrees. By mid-morning, the town square smells of roasted chestnuts and damp wool, and the chatter of market day blends with the ring of a blacksmith's hammer. You wander through the stalls, half distracted by the smell of spiced cider, when a ripple of attention shifts the crowd. Heads turn, a space opens, and there, just beyond the tangle of baskets and carts, two guards are fitting a man with a device you've never seen before, but which feels immediately like a cousin to the brank. It's a strange fork, not for eating, but for holding still. Two iron prongs face away from each other, one angled up toward the chin, the other down toward the breastbone. The whole thing is connected by a leather strap that wraps around the neck, keeping the points pressed firmly in place. The up-pointed prong rests just under the chin, so that even the smallest attempt to drop the head will drive it into the flesh. The lower prong prevents looking down to the chest or speaking freely. Mainstream historical fact devices like this, often called the heretic's fork, were said to be used during the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance sometimes on those accused of heresy, blasphemy, or spreading dangerous ideas. The fork was more about preventing speech than inflicting wounds, though the discomfort could last for hours. Quirky tidbit. Surviving examples sometimes had small inscriptions on the shaft, short prayers or threats in Latin meant to guard the wearer's thoughts. A few museum pieces even have tiny bells attached, as though humiliation needed a soundtrack. Historians still argue whether the heretic's fork was common in actual use, or largely a product of later sensational accounts and collectors' imaginations. Regardless, the one in front of you is real enough to glint in the sun. The man wearing it, thin, sharp-nosed with the wiry twitchiness of someone used to quick exits, keeps his eyes fixed ahead. His crime, the Reeve announces, is speaking lies against the council, which could mean anything from open rebellion to making jokes about tax collectors. Given the Reeve's fringe, you privately suspect it's the latter. The guards guide him to a bench in the middle of the square. Every step forces him to keep his head perfectly upright, chin up like a haughty noble. You can see the strain already in his neck muscles, the faint quiver as they hold the position. The fork itself is light, but the posture it demands is exhausting. A boy whispers to his sister that if the man falls asleep, the fork will wake him. She giggles. Someone in the crowd tries to talk to him, asks if he's learned his lesson, but all he can manage is a tense grunt. His jaw is clamped so tightly, you can see the pulse in his temple. There's a strange dignity to it. Unlike the shame flute's farce or the brank's clanging indignity, the fork is silent, forcing its lesson on both wearer and watchers. You find yourself staring at the tiny rivets in the leather strap, the way the sunlight catches them, as though even this unpleasant thing was crafted with care. A merchant near you leans in and mutters that in some cities the fork was worn not in public, but in a locked room where a prisoner had to sit upright all night. No sleeping, no speaking, just thinking about the charges. Whether that was meditative justice or slow cruelty depends, he says, on who's telling the story. The man shifts slightly on the bench. The upper prong nudges his chin. The lower kisses the hollow of his throat. You watch him breathe shallowly to avoid movement. His eyes dart from face to face, maybe searching for sympathy, maybe calculating how many more hours until the guards release him. After a while, the crowd drifts back toward their errands, the punishment no longer fresh enough to hold their interest. A dog lies in the shade near the bench, its tail thumping occasionally. The man's head stays locked in place, and you wonder if he envies the dog's ability to scratch an itch without consequence. As you turn away, you realize you've been holding your own head unusually still, as if the fork's discipline has spread outward through the air. You shake it off carefully and head toward the cider stall, the taste of iron imagined on your tongue. You notice the beam before you notice the men shaping it, the way it sits on two stout trestles like a roof ridge that got bored and came down to street level. It's planned to a surprisingly fine edge, not knife sharp, but thin enough that your body registers the geometry as a warning. A length of rope dangles from each end, the ends tied into tidy loops. The blacksmith you've come to recognize runs a hand along the top, testing for splinters, with the same care he gives a blade. You think of the brank, the shame flute, the pillory tools made by hands, like his iron whispering to wood, whispering to skin. Someone says, "Bring the mare," and that's what it is. In this town's mouth, the wooden mare, the wooden horse, sometimes the chevalet, when the Reeve is feeling continental. The name is almost affectionate, like a pet that never bites except it does in its own quiet way. You could ride this thing all afternoon if you had a backside of oak. You do not. They are punishing a pair today. Two men who brawled outside the tavern knocked over a table and offended a visiting notary by arguing whether his feathered hat makes him taller or just optimistic. The town has decided on a lesson that favors balance and patience over bruised pride. The men are led to the beam eyes sliding over the polished ridge with a mix of bravado and the dawning awareness that bravado doesn't help much with physics. The first is hoisted up by the elbows, one guard on each side, easy as lifting a sack of barley, and lowered astride the beam. His legs swing down, toes scraping at the air for purchase that isn't there. The beam narrows the world to a single line of pressure. His breath hitches. The second follows his face, fixed in the expression of a man who's decided to pretend this is comfortable until his bones agree. Spoiler, they won't. Mainstream historical fact punishments of the wooden horse family appear in European records from the late Middle Ages, and especially blossom in the early modern period, military camps, civic squares, even New World colonies. Soldiers in the 30 Years' War were ridden for drunkenness or insubordination. Later, militia in colonial towns used a sawhorse variant, sometimes with weights tied to the ankles, to encourage moral clarity. The shape varies, some beams triangular, some rounded, some edged like a dull wedge. But the lesson is consistent. Sit upright, endure, and think about your choices. A quirky tidbit brushes by like a sparrow. In a few places, the rider wore a paper hat with horns, or a sign, the medieval equivalent of a caption, king of fools, barrel brawler, poor ale peddler. One French account mentions greasing the top to prevent the condemned from shifting for relief, which is either ingenuity or spite disguised as maintenance. And yes, sometimes musicians were made to serenade the riders. Somewhere the shame flute wheezes in sympathetic memory. They give the men wooden rods to hold like reins, which doesn't help anyone but does look tidy. You drift closer, soft-footed, the squares sound, pressing like wool against your ears, the chatter of onlookers settling into a watchful murmur. Chicken clucks, a smith's distant tap, a vendor hawking hot chestnuts with the voice of a man who loves a captive audience. You smell the resin of fresh-cut pine from the horse's supports, and the faint ghost of lamp oil from last night's lamps wind-lifted from the lanes. You've learned the mare's trick already from the angle of the men's shoulders. The pain isn't spectacle fast. It's a slow pour. At first, it's novel, awkward, a bit humiliating, the kind of thing that converts bystanders into expert posture critics. By the middle, the rider is making micro-adjustments. Tilt pelvis, straighten spine, squeeze thighs to redistribute pressure that refuses redistribution. By the end, even pride can't find a comfortable place to sit. This device is an essay on gravity in a town that likes very short sermons. One guard ties a small stone to each rider's ankles, not a boulder, a hand-sized river rock polite in its way, but enough to lengthen the line of pull so the thighs can't keep cheating upward. The stones swing gently like pendulums measuring the rider's regrets. You wince in solidarity. The Reeves fringe makes an appearance brave and buoyant as he reads the charge, brawling damage to property, disturbing the peace, and this is new, insulting a hat. The crowd chuckles. You're pretty sure the notary is hiding somewhere behind a cartwheel, counting this as a victory for feathers. Sit straight, the beadle says, which has become the town's unofficial motto. You watch the men breathe shallow at first, then deeper when their bodies realize oxygen is a friend. You remember your own slow breath lessons, bridle-strapped tongue negotiating each inhale. River cold, pressing your ribs into arithmetic. The shame flute forcing breath into honks. Here, breath becomes ballast. The more evenly they breathe, the less their bodies panic. Joke 1, welcome to medieval yoga warrior pose with accessories. A child bold as kittens sidles up to the horse and asks if he can pat it. The beetle nods and the child thumps the beam with admiration, then declares, "It doesn't look so bad." The first rider says nothing because words are a luxury. The second manages a smile that contains 7 different opinions. You file away a silent callback to the river water didn't look so bad from the bank either. Your mind drifts as it does in long watches. You think about horses you've actually seen, real ones, breath puffing in winter leather, creaking their backs warm under a palm. You think about how people borrow shapes from animals to teach lessons to other people, ducking like a duck, riding like a rider. The mare's wooden spine presses analogies into the air. Historians still argue whether the wooden mare belongs to our century or truly to the Middle Ages, says a voice at your shoulder, the blacksmith maybe, or the clerk who collects small facts like their coins that jingle nicely. Some say it's more a camp punishment gone public in stories. Others swear their great-grandfather's cousin's wife saw one in the town where the bread was always stale. He shrugs. A good story breeds variations. You nod. He's right. The mayor feels like a traveler that visits where spectacle is needed and leaves behind only a rumor and a polished beam. Half an hour in, the riders begin to do that thing people do when discomfort gets boring. They make jokes with their eyes. The first nudges an eyebrow at his neighbor as if to say, "If we fall off, let's pretend we meant to." The second flicks his reins like he's about to trot. The crowd chuckles, which helps them for about 9 seconds. Willem of the Barrel leans against a post, arms folded, mouth tilted with sympathy. He mouths shift to the left, then the right, like a coach whose sport is endurance with a scoreboard of minutes. A woman appears. You recognize her as the one who gave you the apple after the bridal and offers water held up in a ladle so they can sip without bending. The first fails and sputters, manages a half laugh, half cough, and the beetle gently steadies the ladle higher. "Small sips," he says like a mantra. The town can be kind sometimes within the rules. Joke 2, hydration, is the medieval hack no influencer tells you about. You notice the mayor's top has been subtly rounded, no malicious edge today. The blacksmith catches your eye and taps the beam twice, a quiet reassurance he could have made it meaner. You nod your thanks. Tools are expressions of their makers. So are punishments. The notary emerges at last, hat fearlessly feathered, and watches for a dignified minute before pronouncing himself satisfied that honor is restored. He buys chestnuts, which feels like a flourish. The reeve pretends not to see him, which is honestly a kindness to everyone's sense of proportion. You try not to think about the reeve's fringe. You fail. Your inner critic replaces it with a sensible cap in imagination. Your tongue remembering iron votes to keep that editorial inside. An older man next to you murmurs that when he was a boy, the mayor was wheeled around the square like a parade float, with a drummer tapping a soft cadence so riders couldn't measure time by silence. He says it with the fondness people reserve for discomfort that happened to someone else. Would they wheel it now? Maybe if the shame flute's owner wants to start a band. The image makes you snort softly. The riders hear and grin. Pain recognizes humor like dogs recognize friends. Time stretches, then blurs. The stones at their ankles swing slower, then still. Shoulders droop. One rider's jaw clenches hard enough that a muscle draws a line along his cheek. The other closes his eyes in sleep. Sleep would be an adventure here, but in the steadying way of a person who has decided to go somewhere inside himself, where beams are theoretical. You respect that. You've been to that place. It has soft floors and a sign that says, "Back soon. Surviving." The beetle checks the sun with the ease of a man whose hourglass is the sky and announces 2 more minutes. Relief pulses through the crowd like a shared exhale. You think of those who rode longer elsewhere. Soldiers left until their thighs shook, weights increasing in little negotiations with time. The line between discipline and cruelty is a tightrope. This town walks it, wobbles, corrects, wobbles again. At the call, the guards lift them down, hands under armpits, and the men find the ground the way sailors find land after weeks on water, careful, amazed. Their first steps are small and funny, and the crowd tries not to laugh and mostly fails. Laughter lightens. It doesn't mock. The stones are untied, set neatly aside like props. The mare stands empty, its ridge a quiet triangle against the day. Punishment done, the reeve makes them shake hands. The gesture is old as disagreement. They do awkwardly sincere, and then because the world occasionally tires of its own sternness, the first rider bows to the mare with exaggerated gallantry. The second tips an invisible hat. The crowd rewards the bit with a handful of claps. Joke 3, somewhere the shame flute considers a comeback tour. As people drift away, You step close enough to lay your palm on the beam. It's warm where the sun found it smooth, where hands and fabric have polished it, and yes, edged enough to speak with authority. You remember the cold logic of the river, the bridle's steady bite, the pillory's lock, the cucking stool's splash. The mare's voice is different, sit with what you made. Not drown, not silence, just sit. That's its own sort of courage. Good timber, the blacksmith says, appearing at your elbow like a punctuation mark. He taps the support. Oak on the legs, pine on top. Oak holds, pine speaks. You tilt your head at that. Pine speaks, he shrugs. It tells you the rule without breaking you to say it. You think of all the rules here that do break you bones, pride plans, and decide you'll take a speaking pine when offered. Historians still argue whether people left the wooden horse with lessons learned or just new ways to sit. Reform versus deterrence, the eternal seesaw. Watching the riders gather themselves, you think the mare at least offers time for thinking, which is more than can be said for the river's fast theology. The riders hobble off toward the tavern's side door, where you suspect a quiet stool and a cool drink await under the disapproving gaze of the notary's feather. You hope they choose water first. Tiny callback, hydrate, then joke. The square exhales back into market rhythm. A dog investigates the stones, decides they're beneath his notice. The chestnut seller packs his pan with a satisfied little hum. The mare sits anonymous again, a carpentered line in a world of curves. You walk on hips, sympathetic gait, a degree more considerate than usual. Your body's archive adds a page titled, "Do not underestimate triangles." At your doorway, you breathe the wood smoke smell of home, feel the plank under your palm, and marvel at how many lessons are made of wood beams, stools, branks with leather and iron benches beneath paintings. You think of that embroidered moral from yesterday, sit straight, and you smile with your mouth closed, because you're getting better at that. Then you sit gently, the ordinary way, and it feels like luxury. The morning mist hasn't even finished lifting when the first whip crack rolls down the alleyways. It's a sound that doesn't quite belong to the market bustle or church bells. It slices clean and fast, then leaves a silence shaped exactly like its echo. You follow the sound almost without deciding to, weaving between carts, until you see the small crowd gathered in the training yard behind the guardhouse. Two posts stand side by side, their tops joined by a weathered crossbeam. One post already has a man tied to it, shirt stripped away, arms bound above his head, wrists lashed so tight you can see the rope press into his skin. Beside him, coiled neatly on the ground like a sleeping serpent, lies the cat o' nine tails. Mainstream historical fact. The cat o' nine tails was a whip with 9 separate knotted cords, often tipped with hard knots or small bits of bone or metal. It saw use in naval discipline, army punishments, and in some cases civilian justice across the late Middle Ages into the modern era. Each lash could tear skin and muscle, and the multiple cords made it particularly efficient at delivering pain in a wide spread. Quirky tidbit. Some cats were scented with vinegar before use, ostensibly to keep the knots clean, but just as often to make the sting sharper. A few accounts mention whipping across saltwater wet skin, the salt working its own secondary cruelty afterward. Historians still argue whether the cat was common in medieval civic punishment or more a military import that towns adopted for special cases. The truth may be somewhere between the idea traveling with soldiers and finding a place in local justice when a lesson needed to be loud. The man at the post shifts, slightly testing the ropes. His face is pale, but his jaw is set in a way you've seen before, the stubborn look of someone determined not to give the crowd too much satisfaction. His offense, the reeve announces, is repeated thievery from the docks. The goods in question, rope and fish. Half the onlookers seem amused. The other half look like they're taking notes for later. The beetle lifts the whip, its cords dangling like a cluster of snakes' tails. He lets the crowd see it before the first strike. The cords whistle, then land with a flat smack that makes even the smug faces in the front row flinch. The man exhales sharply through his nose but makes no sound. A boy beside you counts under his breath, eager as if tallying goals in a game. The second stroke lands the cords, leaving red marks that bloom quickly on the pale skin. By the fifth, you can see the skin begin to welt and split in thin lines. The smell of leather sweat and faint copper fills the air. Willem of the barrel cloak appears on the edge of the crowd, arms folded. He doesn't smile this time, just watches with the quiet patience of someone who knows endurance is a language you either speak or you don't. By the ninth stroke, the man's knees have begun to bend his body instinctively, curling forward against the ropes. The beetle pauses, giving him a moment to find his balance again before the next. You've seen many punishments here that rely on ridicule, on drawing laughter or jeers from the audience. This one has none of that. The yard is nearly silent except for the crack of the whip and the occasional grunt from the man at the post. The tension feels different, heavier, almost reverent, as though everyone senses they're watching something that will leave its mark long after the ropes are untied. A merchant near you leans in and whispers about a sailor he knew who took 50 lashes at sea for striking an officer. Didn't kill him, he says. Didn't cure him either. He shakes his head, but we all remembered it. By the time the last stroke lands 15 in total, the man's back is a map of raw lines, some oozing, some already swelling into thick welts. The beetle lowers the whip with the same care he used to raise it, coils it neatly, and hangs it on a peg at the edge of the yard. Two guards untie the man, easing his arms down carefully. He sways but stays on his feet, head high, jaw tight. Someone brings a cloth soaked in water to dab at the wounds, though the touch makes him wince. The crowd begins to disperse, murmuring. You stay a moment longer, watching the way the sunlight catches on the knots of the whip as it hangs there harmless for now. You think of the brank's cold pressure, the shame flute's wheeze, the river's chill, all tools that use discomfort and visibility. The cat o' nine tails uses something simpler and harder to forget pain that writes itself on the body in an unmistakable script. As you walk away, the sound of the whip seems to follow you down the lane, a phantom crack that will take hours to fade. You find yourself rolling your shoulders as though to shake it off, but it lingers like the river's cold, like the mare's ridge, like the pillory's wood. Some lessons here are too well made to vanish quickly. By the time you reach the square, the charcoal's already going low red and steady, the kind of heat that feels patient rather than furious. The brazier sits like a small sun on 3 iron legs, and from its center rises the iron itself, long-handled, with a letter at the end you can't quite see yet. The smell is a blend of ash and something sour-sweet, like old wine spilled on warm stone. People gather in that practiced arc, again the same geometry that held the pillory the mare, the shame flute the river. The town knows how to make a half circle. It also knows how to make a point. Branding day. You feel your shoulders tense as if they've read ahead. The reeve's voice rides the air, a thief caught twice, bread and bolts of cloth, the first time a pouch of coin, the second. We mark what we want, remembered, he says, and the phrase lands with the same tidy finality as the pillory's lock. The blacksmith you've come to recognize stands beside the brazier, turning the stem slowly, so heat travels evenly. He's all economy of motion. No flourishes, just the practiced calm of someone who knows how fast iron changes from stubborn to soft, from dull to bright. He checks the color with a squint, not flashy yellow-white, just that steady cherry that promises a clean impression. Somewhere your memory inserts a river-cold shiver as if your body is trying to balance fire with old water. Mainstream historical fact: while your stomach does tiny flips in parts of medieval and early modern England, branding became a way to mark certain convictions, especially when courts granted mercy. Under the so-called benefit of clergy, a first-time offender might escape a hanging, but receive a brand on the thumb, often a T for thief, or sometimes an F for felon, so he couldn't claim the same mercy twice. Judges checked thumbs like bouncers checking stamps. The practice echoed beyond England too, with letters or symbols pressed onto shoulder or cheek, depending on the place and the mood of the law. The prisoner's hands are bound in front, a rope circling his waist so he can be held steady. He's young enough that the word repeat feels like a dare, not a diagnosis. The iron rests in the coals, quiet as a sleeping snake. You sense the crowd's breath hitch the same way they lean in for the cucking stool's drop or the whip's first crack. Spectacle has rhythms here. You could set a drum to it. Joke one: if the shame flute wanted a popular duet partner, this would be it. The blacksmith lifts the iron and tests the glow, tipping the business end toward the light. There it is, the letter plain, reversed careful. The reversal matters. You've heard stories of apprentice smiths who forgot stamping a proud mirror image onto a brow and gifting the town a walking riddle for a decade. Quirky tidbit box checked: a clerk claims an old writ in his office even noted mark imprinted backwards by careless hand, which turned into the sort of market joke that lives longer than the clerk's ink. Today's letter reads true. The reeve recites the sentence, a mark on the thumb, visible to any who trade with him, and a market day display by the pillory without the wood, just a stand and a sign. You sense again that tightrope the town walks between pain and permanence. A thumb brand is a compromise, small yet impossible to misplace. Cheek marks exist in grim rumor, but the reeve chooses a hand. You almost nod approval, but your tongue, having recently met iron, reminds you to keep your opinions filed under nonverbal. Hand, the blacksmith says to the beetle, and the prisoner's right palm is opened, the thumb turned outward. The beetle's grip is deft. He's done this before. There's practical choreography to it. One man holds the wrist, one steadies the shoulder, the smith controls the heat. The letter hovers for a heartbeat, and the square goes so quiet, you can hear a hen scolding her reflection in a puddle 20 paces away. Then the touch, quick, deliberate, no flourish. A hiss that is mostly imagination, a smell that is not. The prisoner's jaw locks. A small sound escapes anyway, as inevitable as steam. It lasts less than a second, then it's done. When the iron lifts, the skin holds a dark, neat emblem that will bloom into its full story over the hour. The smith rotates the handle in a careful circle through the air, dissipating heat, as if to shoo away any residue of the moment. He slides the iron back into the coals, calm as resetting a tool on a shelf. You catch yourself exhaling. You didn't realize you were holding your breath the way you did on the mare when the riders shifted, or at the river before the dunk, or under the bridle when breath had to be negotiated carefully around hardware. Breathing has become your small rebellion. The reeve announces the letter T and the reason: repeat theft. The crowd murmurs, neither gleeful nor outraged, just accepting. You recognize the tone. It's the same sound people make when the price of onions is fair. Justice as a marketplace, sometimes loud, sometimes smooth. Historians still argue whether branding served primarily as deterrent, as a record-keeping hack for courts, or as a social signal in crowded towns where memory needed help. The answer, annoyingly, is all of the above, depending on who's asking and who is being watched. A woman nearby, yes. The same one who offered you an apple after the bridal leans closer and whispers that, in France, under the old kings, convicts sent to the galleys were sometimes marked with a fleur de lis on the shoulder. Like wearing the monarchy on your skin, she says, making a face that suggests fashion critiques have no safe decade. You file the image away, a lily-shaped shadow pressed into flesh status, reversed into stigma. The beetle wraps the thumb with a strip of linen soaked in something herbal. The scent lifts sharp and green like thyme or pennyroyal. Not mercy exactly, more maintenance. The prisoner's eyes flick to the bandage and then to the crowd. The realization is settling on him, the way a cloak settles on shoulders. This mark will shake hands before he does. It will go to market in his place, whisper in exchanges he can't overhear. The shame flute was a day, the bridal an afternoon, the pillory a morning. A brand is calendar proof. The blacksmith wipes the iron stem with a rag, and you notice his thumb scarred in the way all working hands are nicks and burns mapped like the countryside. Tools bite even the ones who wield them. You wonder if he ever resents being part of this choreography. Then he scratches his nose with a knuckle and looks into the coals with the same measured attention as before. Maybe this is just another job to be done well. No flourish, no cruelty, no delay. In a town that sometimes lets theater wear the judge's robe, there's something almost comforting in simple competence. A boy tugs his mother's sleeve and asks if the letter will wash off. She says no, then softens, adds that time always does a little washing, which is the sort of motherly wisdom you suspect is mostly for other mothers. Willem of the Barrel appears long enough to give you a look that reads, "We collect labels like some people collect spoons," and then drifts off, probably to find something less flammable to witness. Someone claims their cousin saw a man with 3 marks, thumb, shoulder, cheek, and lived to tell it. Someone else counters that's tavern talk, says most courts preferred hands and shoulders because faces are hard to rehabilitate. The debate loops the square in low voices, returning to that civic question you've heard under everything lately. Is a person a sum of their punishments, or of what they do after there's no vote taken? There never is. The prisoner is led to the small platform by the pillory, not into it, just near it, so eyes can locate him easily. A sign hangs by a cord, "Theft, second time." He stands left hand covering the bandage on his right thumb, as if modesty applies to letters. People pass, pretending not to stare and failing in the way people always fail when curiosity is free. You remember standing there yourself, wood against skin, turnip kid, pointing with solemn expertise. The square turns us all into minor constellations for a little while. As the hour drifts, the brand darkens under its linen, doing its private chemistry. An older man with a clerk's ink on his cuffs sidles up and offers an archival aside some quartz. When feeling generous or worried about scarring, required the iron be drawn rather than pressed, a quick trace along the skin that raised a welt but left no permanent seal. He winks, and some sheriffs fond of theater but not of permanence warmed the iron just to show the glow, and then touched it light as a kiss. He shrugs. Records don't always say which happened when. You can feel the crowd's interest prickle. The idea that mercy might sometimes masquerade as rigor is almost as intriguing as the reverse. Joke too if the town ever adopts a motto. We reserve the right to be complicated, would look great on a banner, ideally not the kind stitched from corrupt officials' cloaks. The sun nudges the day forward. Market calls resume their sing-song. A dog lies down under the platform as if justice provides good shade. The reeve takes a last long look at the prisoner, then nods to the beetle to release him from the stand. "Work if you can," the reeve says not unkindly. "Hands are still good for mending." The phrase drops into you like a pebble into a bucket. Hands are still good for mending. You think of your own, the way they held onto the plank over the river, pressed against bridle leather. Steadied you on the mare's beam, learned the pillory's edges waved at Willem, accepted and apple-counted breaths during the cat's quiet thunder. You flex your fingers, grateful they answer. As the crowd thins, you step near the brazier. Heat licks your shins, not dangerous, only insistent. The iron's glow has faded back to dull the letter ordinary again, just a shape. That's the trick of tools cold, they are theories. Hot, they are policies. The blacksmith meets your eyes with a look you've seen him share with the beadle, the reeve. Even the notary when he bought chestnuts. This is not my opinion. This is my craft. You nod because you've learned there's a border between those two, that the town crosses and recrosses like a well-worn path. Historians still argue whether most branded folk found their way back into the fabric of their communities or ended up pulled to the edges by the mark's quiet noise. You suspect watching the prisoner tuck his bandaged hand into his belt and slip into the stream of people that both outcomes happen depending on who's willing to look at thumbs and see more than letters. The square's memory is long. Its attention span is short. Somewhere between those two people live. You leave the heat behind and drift down the lane, the brazier's warmth lingering on your calves like a pleasant ghost. A breeze carries a scatter of sounds. A cartwheel's wobble, someone practicing a real flute. Bless them, a faint jingle that makes you check your mouth out of habit. No bridal today. You smile, small private, at the luxury of being unmarked in ways that show. Joke 3, you consider starting a side hustle, selling tiny mittens that button over thumbs on market day fashion that forgets but decide the notary would tax it by the letter. At home, you lay your hands flat on the table and study them, taking inventory. 10 fingers, 10 small histories. No letters, but plenty of stories, wood polish worked into the lines, river memory caught under the nails, a faint ridge at the base of your thumb where the branch strap once rested. You think about how marks come in two families, the ones towns put on you and the ones you collect by staying alive. Some fade, some don't. Both are honest. The hearth's fire settles into embers, quiet, ready, capable of heat when asked. You stare at that glow and think of the iron's brief brightness. Then you blow softly, watching the ember blush and let it dim back down. Not every coal needs to become a brand. Not every day needs to perform. You stretch your hands toward the warmth, palms open, an offering to a heat that asks nothing back. You've seen wood made cruel pillories, mares, cucking stools, but today the cruelty wears iron from head to toe. The square is quieter than usual, as if even the market smells onions, yeast, wet wool are holding back out of respect or unease. In the center stands something that looks almost like a statue, a tall hinged cabinet of dark metal shaped like a person, its curved front split into two narrow doors. Carved into those doors is a face half serene, half scowling, that stares past you with a fixed indifference. You've heard the whispers, Eiserne Jungfrau, the Iron Maiden, mainstream historical fact, despite its fame as a medieval horror. Historians still argue whether the Iron Maiden existed in the Middle Ages at all, or if it was an 18th to 19th century invention cobbled together from older punishment devices to shock museum-goers. The most famous example displayed in Nuremberg was destroyed in 1945, but some accounts claim it was assembled from an older coffin-like chest and a collection of spikes. Quirky tidbit. A few surviving maidens have spikes that are so long they'd cause immediate death, contradicting the more theatrical idea of keeping someone alive inside. Others have shorter, blunter protrusions placed to injure, but avoid killing quickly, suggesting if used at all, it was about agony and spectacle, not efficiency. The one before you is no museum piece, it's functional, or at least intended to look it. The blacksmith runs his hand along the curve of the door, checking hinges. You notice the faint soot marks where the metal meets. The beetle must have recently oiled it, giving the iron a dark sheen that catches in the late light. The condemned is already there, a man accused of treachery and blasphemy, the kind of double charge that makes townspeople nod solemnly, whether or not they understand the details. His face is pale, his mouth set. 2 guards grip his arms. The reeve, standing a little taller than usual, explains that he will be kept in reflection inside the maiden until his confession is satisfactory. You can almost hear the historians groaning somewhere far away. Reflection is not a word they associate with this thing. The doors open with a deep, reluctant creak. Inside, you see the spikes, slender, uneven, some pointed toward where a chest would be, others aimed for shoulders, arms, thighs. None are long enough to impale deeply. Most look meant to press, to bruise, to puncture just enough to keep the body in a state of constant awareness. The floor is grated, so whatever happens inside drains away another detail that suggests this was built with grim practicality in mind. The man is guided forward. He hesitates only once when his eyes meet the carved face on the door, serene on one side, scowling on the other. Maybe he wonders which expression will be watching him from the outside. The guards position him so the spikes touch without piercing. It's an uncomfortable choreography, fitting a living shape into an unforgiving mold. The doors swing inward with a low metallic sigh, the sound of iron settling. There's a pause, almost like a prayer, and then the latch falls shut. The beetle slides a heavy bolt across, and the maiden becomes a sealed figure again, a hollow statue that now contains a heartbeat. The crowd murmurs, some in fascination, others in discomfort. You can't see the man inside, but you imagine him standing rigid, every small shift pressing skin against cold points. You remember the Brank's tongue stub, the heretic's fork's unyielding posture, the mare's narrow beam devices that demand stillness as punishment. The maiden takes that principle and wraps it in steel. A boy tugs his father's sleeve and whispers, "Will he sleep in there?" The father says no, that this is only for a short time to teach. Whether that's true or just a softer version for young ears, you can't tell. The reeve announces that the man will remain inside until sundown, at which point he may speak his confession. Historians still argue whether anyone was ever truly killed in an Iron Maiden, or if it was more a threat, a display piece for intimidation. Either way, standing here, the potential feels heavy enough. As the hours pass, the square returns to its rhythms, traders calling prices, someone tuning a lute, the smell of baking drifting in. But every so often you glance at the maiden. It doesn't move, but it owns a stillness that bends the air around it. People skirt it without realizing, making space in their paths, as though it's a well they might fall into. Near sunset, the beetle and guards return. The bolt slides back with a scrape. The doors open, and the man steps out stiffly, blinking against the light. His tunic is torn in a few places where spikes press too hard, and there are small spots of blood at his shoulder and hip. He says nothing. The reeve nods as if that silence is enough for now. The maiden's doors close again, empty, but somehow not. You realize it has the same presence as the river. Whether used or not, it holds a threat that doesn't wash away. Joke 1: if the shame flute is a bad concert, the maiden is the worst coat check imaginable. As you walk home, you can't shake the image of that carved face, half serene, half scowling. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Punishment in this town can look like justice or vengeance depending on where you stand. The maiden doesn't care which side you choose. The square feels quieter tonight, like a theater after the orchestra packs up, and the floor still holds the weight of sound. Lamps bloom along the lanes, small halos on hooks. You follow a hush rather than a crowd down a side alley, where the stone stays damp and the air remembers tidewater. There's a shape there that isn't quite furniture, and isn't quite a tool, a low table, a few iron rings, a clay brazier breathing a steady orange, and sitting innocently near the edge, a wide-bellied barrel with its bottom cut out. Someone has fitted a thin grate across the open mouth, the way you'd cap a hive to travel bees without losing them. Inside the barrel, skittering a tiny shuffle like a whisper with claws. You already know the name before anyone says it. The rat barrel. A small problem introduced to a human body with the philosophical prompt, find the fastest way out. There are no speeches today, and the Reeves' famous fringe declines to attend. This punishment works best in a backwater of the city's conscience. The beetle with his winter beard manages the chore. Two helpers steady a man on the table shirt, pulled high belt, removed a square of his midriff, chalked into a rough box. He's a smuggler by rumor, a deserter by charge, and the sort of neighbor people swear they never liked once the guards have already tied the knots. You watch the helpers check those knots with calm hands. They do the same checks for the pillory and the mare. Orders and rope know each other well. The barrel is set open, mouth down on the chalked square, its other end facing up like a doorway to nowhere. The grate sparks once when it rubs the rim. Inside, the rat keeps its own council whiskers probing the air. It smells feathers and crumbs and heat. You smell damp wood, lamp oil, and something sharp from the brazier, a tang of hot metal and warm clay, not cruel in itself, just present. Mainstream historical fact, accounts of this method, surface most clearly in the 16th century, early modern the century, that loves a grim innovation with chroniclers of the Dutch Revolt naming Diederik Sonoy among those who used a pot with rats and a fire on prisoners. The concept appears in scattered European sources, thereafter sometimes in city interrogations, sometimes in war camps. Whether its roots reach back into the late Middle Ages or simply wear medieval clothing when told as a story, the line blurs the way legends blur when they enjoy being repeated. A helper lifts the brazier and sets it on the grate. Not directly searing, this is not a branding day, but close enough that the air above the rat turns into days you'd rather spend near water. The rat churns the moment the heat changes the paragraph of its life. It scuffles around the barrel's curve, meets wood, finds no sky, meets heat again. And then the logic of rats, which is the logic of all small, quick things, asserts itself, if not up, then down. You don't watch this kind of thing straight on. You learn from the river to glance, to count breaths, to take in details sideways. The helpers pin the barrel's rim with sandbags to keep it still. One pats the top gently, as if pacifying a beehive, which tells you two things. First, this isn't his favorite job. Second, he believes in the power of gestures, even when the audience is furred and furious. Quirky tidbit for your inventory. Some towns used a heavy ceramic pot instead of a barrel bread baker's ware, glazed smooth inside, so little claws found no purchase. Others used a wicker basket covered with a pan and warmed with embers. This version tended to fail when the basket burned first, producing more embarrassment than confession. You've even heard an old soldier claim they tried a ferret once, too curious, not focused, he said, as if reviewing an employee. The brazier method unpleasantly gets the results the script expects. The man on the table breathes the way you learned to breathe in the bridle, measured, careful nose. Only because everything else calls attention. Sweat beads along his temples. He fixes his eyes on the underside of a roof beam and tries to go someplace inside himself where barrels and rats are simply words in a list. The beetle murmurs questions that have no poetry, names, places, amounts. The man shakes his head once, and that's enough for the beetle to touch the brazier closer by a finger's width. You tilt your head so you can hear the rat more than see it. There's a flurry, a pause, a new flurry with angles in it, corners investigated, heat reevaluated. The rat's problem-solving pace accelerates the way a drum roll does when the drummer wants applause. Rats are fast thinkers. The body under the barrel tries not to be. Historians still argue whether scenes like this were dramatized for effect in pamphlets, or whether they were truly practiced with any regularity, says a voice behind you, the clerk with ink on his cuffs, of course. Interrogators loved the threat. Threats are cheap. He shrugs. Sometimes, though, threats got promoted. You glance at him. He offers a sympathetic grimace. The blacksmith isn't here. Iron has no starring role tonight. Wood, clay, rope, and a small heartbeat, the town's simpler materials. You remember the Iron Maiden's carved face, half serene and half scowling. The barrel has no face. It is all stomach. That feels important. Some punishments stare back at you, demanding you grasp the lesson visually. This one keeps its attention turned inward, where the only witnesses are nerves and nerves' cousins. You hold still because your body suggests it. The rat works because its body insists. The brazier keeps breathing. Talk, the beetle says, not unkindly. His tone is the tone of a man checking a ledger. You think about the shame flute and how it forced breath into comedy. Here, breath doesn't want to be funny. It wants to be quiet enough to pass for a leaf trembling in wind. A small sound escapes the man, a thin, not quite word. The helpers glance at the beetle. The beetle leans a little closer to the open end of the barrel and repeats the question about names. The man swallows. His eyes flick from the beam to the alley's mouth. Movement tugs along the barrel's rim. You see nothing vivid. The town loves PG-13 as much as you do. You see enough to learn two things. First, the rat has chosen a direction. Second, the body under the barrel has noticed. Joke one whispered into the space between awful and absurd. Somewhere a marketing apprentice is writing copy for a traveling carnival marvel at the amazing escape artist who always finds a way out, and you hope he changes careers soon. The man's stare fractures. He blinks once, twice, and the blink says enough. Names begin to land, halting, unheroic, heavy, with the practicality of people who like coins more than quiet. He gives one, then two, then the place the goods were passed, the time the lantern is hung, the signal nobody should ever have trusted in the first place. The beetle listens without glee, nodding at intervals, as if checking off items on a shopping list. He raises a palm. The helper slides the brazier a hand's width away. In the barrel, movement slackens, becomes confused, scuffling rather than decision. Heat eases back into background. Quirky tidbit number 2, some manuals, so they say, suggested smearing the barrel's rim with a paste of peppermint and vinegar to confuse the animal's sense of direction. Whether that spared skin or simply made the whole room smell like a salad, historians still argue. But you make a mental note that mint keeps turning up in this town, in the strangest places: apples, dunkings, conscience clearing. Remember that cucking stool sprig? Apparently mint has a side gig as moral garnish. Joke 2, if the shame flute wants a signature scent, Eau de Peppermint Panic is available. The beetle's questions soften, then stop. He taps the barrel twice, the same gentle there you heard before. There's a rhythm to ending things here, even the rough ones. The brazier is lifted off entirely and set aside, its orange heartbeat dimming now that its job is done. The helpers unweight the rim, and with the kind of practiced speed that proves this isn't their first snatch, the barrel up and away. The rat vanishes into a sack with a flourish. You suspect they've learned to make the retrieval seem like a magic trick rather than a scramble. Rope is cut. The man's shirt is tugged down. Breath returns to the room in a low, communal exhale. You study the beetle's face. Not smug, not cruel, just older around the eyes than he was an hour ago. He nods to the helpers. The smuggler, deserter, everyman sits up slowly, then swings his legs down, hands braced on the table, the way you braced yourself on the riverbank. Someone presses a cloth into his palm, someone else water. He drinks badly at first, then better learning again. The clerk with the ink cuffs folds his slate and murmurs to no one in particular. Threats are cheap, but endings are expensive. You think of the Iron Maiden's bolt sliding back the cat coiled on its peg, the brand cooling to dull the mare left warm by the sun. Every device has its choreography of closure. The rat barrels is quick by design, by decency, by the need to walk the tightrope without pretending there's no drop beneath. Mainstream historical fact nudges your shoulder one last time. Printed broadsheets from the Dutch Revolt did more than record. They advertised each side accusing the other of monstrousness. Rat pots, water tortures, burning barns. Propaganda fed on punishments like crows on harvest. Some methods lived longer on paper than in practice, but the paper did its work anyway, seeding dread. The town, while smaller than a broadsheet's appetite, still understands the economy. A hint here, a half-seen barrel there, and the square's imagination fills the rest. The man speaks quiet flat. He agrees to lead the beetle to a cellar, then to a fence, then to a cart. The beetle doesn't congratulate him. He just nods and says, "Walk." They do slow at first, then with purpose. The helpers shoulder the barrel and the brazier and melt into the alley's deeper dusk, leaving behind only the smell of warm clay and a ghost of ash. You linger. The air cools your face in long, polite fingers. A cat. A proper one with exactly 9 tails, fewer than the last punishment, ambles into the alley, pauses at the table's leg, and decides there's nothing here for cats tonight. It leaves with the self-esteem of a creature that has never once answered a beetle's question. Joke 3, you briefly consider hiring the cat as your legal counsel. Payment in turnips and disdain. On your way back toward the square, you pass the places that have learned your footsteps. The pillory's wood holds the day's leftover sun. The mare's beam smells faintly of pine and bravado. The river whispers over stones like a gossip, finally tired of its own voice. You think about the catalog you've been building: iron for silence, wood for stillness, water for verdicts, fire for memory, small animals for the places language won't go. Each tool is less about its metal or its grain than about the posture it demands from everyone in the scene. The watched, the watchers, the ones who tie knots, the ones who write names. At your door, your hand finds the latch by habit. Inside the room breathes smoke and wool and the day's dust settling. You sit and practice that gentle YouTube host voice in your head, the one that keeps company rather than pushes. You're okay, it says, and you believe it more than you would if someone else said it. Your thoughts wander to the mint on the table, the apple core browning in the bowl, the faint ring, a hot cup left on the wood. Ordinary marks, the kind you don't mind keeping. There are worse emblems. Before sleep, you let your mind step back to the alley one more time, not for the heat or the scuffle, but for the way the helper's hands moved, quick, efficient, almost tender, in that careful, minimizing sense. You file that under Complicated Mercies, a folder that's getting a lot of use lately. Somewhere between spectacle and restraint, this town keeps trying to teach itself how not to fall off the fence. When you finally stretch out, the night makes its soft, creaking noises, settling beams, a far-off laugh, the fan-like hush of wind in the thatch. Your body inventories itself the way it does now, tongue intact, ribs counting slow, back recalling the cat's echo hands, unlettered feet warm. You make a bargain with sleep, no barrels, no flutes, maybe a river, but only at noon with dragonflies, and drift with the easy sway of someone who survived another day in a place that loves its props a little too much. The sound reaches you before the sight would, cracking under stress, a deep thunk that rattles up through the soles of your feet. It's not the hollow knock of a cucking stool hitting water or the quick clatter of the mare's supports. This is slower, heavier. You follow it to the edge of the square, where a wide cart has been set up, like a stage, its deck raised higher than a man's head. On it lies a wheel. Not a cartwheel, not anymore. It's been taken off its axle and set flat on trestles, its hub gleaming faintly with oil. The rim is studded with thick iron strips for reinforcement, and the spokes radiate like the ribs of some huge, patient beast. You've heard of this one. Everyone has, even if they've only heard the name whispered in the back of a tavern breaking on the wheel. Mainstream historical fact in much of continental Europe from the late Middle Ages into the 18th century. The wheel was a form of execution reserved for the gravest crimes, murder, treason, sometimes robbery with violence. The condemned's limbs were methodically broken with an iron bar, then threaded between the spokes or lashed to the rim to finish the display. In some regions, the wheel was mounted upright afterward, the body left for all to see. Quirky tidbit. Some records describe merciful versions where the executioner delivered a fatal blow to the chest or neck, first breaking the bones post-mortem for form's sake. Others tell of elaborate variations, placing the person face down, weaving them through the spokes like a grotesque braid, or positioning them so their head protruded through the hub. Historians still argue whether certain regions leaned toward spectacle or swiftness, though the line between them was always thin. Today's scene is not an execution, or at least it hasn't been announced as one. The Rav stands at the cart's edge, reading charges: violent assault, attempted murder, resisting arrest. His fringe looks subdued, weighed down by the damp. The crowd is quieter than at the pillory or the shame flute. Even the market sellers have paused their patter. This punishment carries a gravity that doesn't invite jokes, well, not many. Joke one, you briefly wonder if the wheelwright gets paid extra for this sort of gig, or if it's just listed under miscellaneous services. The condemned is led up the cart steps. He's bound at wrists and ankles, his shirt cut open at the shoulders. A thick-armed man with a blacksmith's stance today, serving as executioner, picks up the bar. It's not delicate, a length of iron with a bulbous head heavy enough that its swing hums audibly. The first strike lands on the prisoner's forearm, a muffled crack that makes the crowd collectively flinch. He grits his teeth, a sound escaping anyway, too rough to be a word. The executioner steps to the other side, repeating the motion with professional symmetry. Another crack. The body begins to sag against the ropes, holding it to the trestles. You've seen pain as theater here before. Pillory turnips, the shame flutes, honks. But this is theater without humor. The strikes continue, each announced by the shift of the executioner's shoulders. Lower arm, upper arm, shin, thigh. The bar's rhythm is deliberate, a grim percussion against the spokes. Beside you, the ink-cuffed clerk mutters that in some towns the sequence was ritualized. Right arm, right leg, left leg, then the coup de grace. He says it like quoting a recipe, though his face is pale. You wonder if he's thinking about the line between documenting and condoning. When the limbs are broken, the executioner begins the threading, sliding the man's arms and legs through the wheel's gaps so they cross over each other at impossible angles. The ropes are retied to keep him in place. The visual is unmistakable, the human body made part of the wheel, caught in its geometry. The Reeve announces that he will remain here until sundown, after which his sentence will be decided. Whether that means prison exile or the final step, no one says. Historians still argue whether such temporary wheelings were meant as warnings or just the first act in a longer punishment. You step back, giving the cart space. The crowd shifts too, some drifting away, others holding their ground, as though the act of looking is a civic duty. Willem of the Barrel stands near the back, his usual half-smile absent. The woman who once gave you an apple has her arms folded, eyes fixed on the rim. The prisoner's breathing is shallow but steady. The wheel creaks slightly as his weight shifts. The iron strips along the rim catch the light like small watching eyes. Joke 2. If the shame flute was an unwanted duet partner, the wheel is a dance floor you never want to book. You think of the river's cold, the mare's ridge, the cat's sting pain delivered in moments. The wheel is a slower inscription, one that writes its message into bone. And while the other punishments here return you to the square, eventually, this one keeps you as part of the scenery for hours. By the time you head home, the air smells faintly of rain. You glance back once to see the wheel still there, still holding its geometry, the man inside it, blinking up at the gray sky. It's a shape you'll remember whether or not the town decides to finish the sentence. Joke 3, you can't help but think that in another life, this wheel would have been happier carrying onions to market. You hear it before you see it, a steady dum dum dum, not fast enough to be festive, not slow enough to be solemn. A metronome for humiliation. The sound comes along the lane like a weather front, and people turn as if the drum were tugging a rope tied to their chins. You know that tug. It's the same one that drew you to the pillory, to the mare, to the river's plank. The square loves a beat. They call this one the drummer's march. Not a race, not even a parade, just a walk with a soundtrack, the drum insisting that every step matters more than the last. The drummer is a boy you've seen at the guardhouse, long arms, easy wrists, the sort of natural timing that makes even a wooden spoon on a table sound intentional. He wears the town's colors knotted in a strip at his shoulder. The Reeves fringe is at full attention today, and he walks behind the drummer with the posture of a man pretending he invented rhythm. Between them and the interest of everyone else is the culprit, a man roped lightly at the waist, hands free-forced to keep pace. His shoes are thin, his tunic too. You notice the small sign hung around his neck, 2 words painted in quick black letters, "Deserters Lie." Rumor has it he begged sickness to skip militia watch, then showed up robustly at a private dice game. The sort of arithmetic the town never forgives. The drum speaks again. Dum, dum, dum. You fall in halfway back the way you do now, close enough to taste the mood, far enough to pretend you aren't part of it. The crowd naturally arranges into that half circle you've come to recognize, except today, the circle moves oozing through streets that smell like damp stone and yesterday's onions. Kids thread the edges, trying to step in time and overshooting. A dog decides the procession is definitely about him and trots beside the deserter with concerned eyebrows. Mainstream historical fact, long before neat parade grounds, towns and armies used marching as punishment. Late medieval civic penances often required a barefoot walk through the market in a simple shirt candle, in hand the amende honorable in French cities. Early modern armies, especially the German Landsknechts, used public walks with drums to shame offenders, sometimes drumming out them from the ranks, sometimes Gassenlaufen running the gauntlet with a corridor of soldiers. The music wasn't decoration, it was a spell that kept the pace and the eyes. The Reeve calls out stops like a tour guide of disgrace. At the inn, pause 3 beats so the men sipping their morning ale can watch. At the weaver's porch, pause so the looms get a break from being the only things in town that work without complaint. At the church porch, longer pause so everyone can layer piety over curiosity. With each halt, the drummer keeps a soft roll under the air, never letting the silence get comfortable. You think of the shame flute and its honk-forced breath. Here, the drum manages the breaths of an entire street. You catch a detail that makes you tug your lip with your teeth. The man's shoes are wet. Not just puddle wet. The leather has the dark look of having been soaked on purpose. Beside you, the ink-cuffed clerk materializes like a footnote. quirky tradition, he whispers. They say some towns made marchers walk with peas in their shoes, peas soaked overnight, so they swell beneath the feet. He gives a small apologetic shrug. Whether that's guild myth or neighbor malice, historians still argue. You imagine a bowl of peas transforming in the dark, like a petty miracle. You also imagine your own feet and decide peas belong in pottage. The drummer's hands never falter. The beat threads you all together, watchers, walker, officials, the dog. It snags on your nerves in the way a simple rhythm can make a chore feel like a duty. Your body begins to want to match it. You find yourself stepping with the march for a dozen paces before you remember. You have no sign around your neck and let the beat pass you by. At the market cross, the reeve raises his hand. The drum snaps to a crisp stop. The silence is almost comical, like someone yanked the floor out and put it back exactly wrong. The reeve recites an article about the watch, that all able men must stand when called, that lies are termites in the town beam, that sleep is a luxury purchased with vigilance. People nod as if they've heard this sermon in their bones. You glance at Willem of the Barrel, who stands apart, hat in his hands. He gives you the smallest smile. Walking is cheaper than rope. You agree silently. You've gotten good at silent agreements since the bridle taught your tongue restraint. The march resumes, dum, dum, dum. The man's shoulders hunch slightly. His head wants to droop, but that sign forces him forward. You recognize the posture from the heretic's fork posture. As punishment, the body's desire to fold in on itself turned into a trigger for more shame. The town adores postures and their corrections. A woman steps out from a doorway. You know her by now, the one who handed you an apple after your bridal day, and presses a tiny sprig into the deserter's palm. Mint, of course. She says nothing. He says nothing. They both know the rules, no kindness that stalls the drum. He tucks the sprig under the rope at his waist. It bounces with his steps, absurdly jaunty, and the sight is a better joke than anyone dares to tell out loud. Joke 1, your brain supplies an advertisement, Mint, the official sponsor of regret. By the river bend, the air cools and the drum sounds rounder, as if the water adds a bass note. You remember your own dunkings, the rope at your waist, the way cold turns you into glass. You want to tell the marcher to breathe in through his nose, to count to 4, to picture dragonflies at noon, all the tricks you earned the wet way. Instead, you tuck your hands into your sleeves and count his steps. 36 to the willow, 12 more to the bridge. He stumbles at 49, catches himself, and the drum doesn't stop. That's the deal. The drum stops when the reeve raises his hand, not when feet ask. The ink-cuffed clerk leans near again. There's a record from a Swabian town, he murmurs, of a soldier marched out to the gates to the beat, then banished at the final cadence. He pauses, then adds, and English regiments later loved the phrase drummed out coat turned inside out drum at the back. Shame measured in bars. He looks at the drummer with something like admiration. Instruments have long memories. Mainstream fact tucked neatly just where the beat can hold it. The man's steps are shorter now. The wet leather has softened into the sort of floppy embrace only a shoemaker would fear. Blisters announce themselves even if you can't see them. You can hear it in the micro pauses like hiccups in the rhythm. Children imitate his careful gait until their mothers tug them back. The dog, to its credit, keeps perfect time and an air of professional concern. Joke 2, you consider recommending him as an assistant reeve. The fringe would never share the spotlight. Halfway down the lane, the notary, yes. The feathered hat stumbles into view from a doorway, takes one look, and retreats like a crab startled by a bucket. You chalk that up as the day's smallest mercy. The notary's feather has suffered enough narratives. The route takes them past the council hall. Through the open door, you catch a gleam, the panel of cambyses, the warning about judges and chairs. For a moment, the marcher's sign and the painted image overlap in your mind, ink and wood living, and still both spelling out what happens when trust is broken. One is a frozen cautionary tale. The other is a moving one measured in beats instead of brushstrokes. The reeve glances toward the panel as they pass, maybe hoping the marcher notices, maybe reminding himself. The drum keeps going. Dum, dum, dum. By now the crowd has thinned. Market folk return to their stalls. The children get bored of pacing and start chasing each other instead, only to run ahead and rejoin the march when it turns into their street. You and a handful of others remain loyal to the rhythm, either out of civic spirit or morbid curiosity. You've stopped trying to tell which. Near the baker's, the smell of bread flares into the air, buttery and warm. The marcher's head tilts ever so slightly toward it, but the drum does not forgive distractions. The baker herself comes to the door, flour to her elbows, and watches in silence. You wonder if she's counting blisters in her head, the way you're counting steps. Mainstream historical fact in some towns, civic marches like this ended not at a jail or scaffold, but at the town's main gate where the offender might be turned around and told to walk back alone. Shame still riding the spine, but without the audience. Others made the final stop at a fountain, or well symbolically washing the misdeed away in front of witnesses, though whether anyone actually felt clean afterward is another debate historians still have. The reeve finally raises his hand, and the drum snaps to a clean stop. The sudden absence of sound is like someone opened a door to a quieter room. The marcher stands still, shoulders sagging, the mint sprig still bobbing absurdly from his rope. His shoes are a darker brown now, leather limp, the toes slightly curled from wetness. The reeve steps in front of him, reads a short statement, something about duty, about honesty, about the dignity of the watch. Then, to your surprise, he gestures to the drummer, who lifts his sticks one last time and gives 3 crisp beats. The signal that it's over. The marcher exhales, shoulders rolling forward. He doesn't look at the crowd, only down at his swollen feet. The rope is untied. The sign is taken from his neck. He's told to report for watch duty tomorrow with no dice in sight. You hear a few chuckles at that. The closest this day comes to humor. Joke 3, you imagine the watch roster now printed with no dice in fine script right under "Bring Your Own Pike." The drummer and reeve turn away together, already discussing something else. The marcher limps toward the far street, the mint sprig still tucked in place like a stubborn badge. You watch him go until the rhythm fades from your own bones, replaced by the usual noise of the square hawkers, laughter, a distant hammer. As you head home, you notice you've been unconsciously pacing your steps in sets of 3, the ghost of the drum still keeping time in your ears. You shake it off, but later, as you drift towards sleep, it sneaks back soft, even inevitable. Dum, dum, dum. The next morning, the square holds something that wasn't there. Before a tall, narrow cage made of wood and iron, dangling from a stout beam, like a lantern too big for any doorframe. It hangs just high enough that the bottom clears the cobbles when it swings. And swinging it will. You wander closer. The iron bars are thin but strong, spaced just wide enough for the outline of a face to appear between them. The floor is a simple lattice of wood. From one side you can see the rope and pulley that hoist the whole contraption into the air. From the other, the hand crank attached to a wheel. It looks more like a bell ringer's tool than a device for punishment. The reeve stands nearby, his fringe already restless in the wind. The beetle is checking the ropes. A small crowd has formed with the usual scattering of familiar faces, Willem of the barrel leaning on his elbows, the apple-giving woman holding a basket. the ink-cuffed clerk already poised to murmur a historical aside. The Reeve announces today's sentence in his town crier voice, disturbing the peace, inciting quarrels, and throwing stones at the baker's window. The culprit, a wiry man with a restless jaw, is marched forward in simple shackles. He looks like he's still measuring distances for a throw. Mainstream historical fact devices like this existed in several medieval and early modern cities under names like Schaukelturm, Swing Tower, or simply whirligig. They were designed to spin an offender until they lost balance, stomach, or composure. Used for petty crimes, drunkenness, gossip, market cheating, they worked on the principle that humiliation and nausea make strong deterrents. Sometimes they took the form of a suspended chair. Other times, as here, a cage. Quirky tidbit. A 16th century London record mentions a whirligig for female offenders in Cheapside, a barrel with holes for arms and head, spun by two men until she was well purged of her mischief. Whether purged meant confession or simply a stomach emptied in the street, historians still argue. The beadle opens the small cage door, and the man steps in reluctantly, ducking his head. The interior barely fits him. He has to stoop and wrap his arms close to his sides. The door clanks shut, the latch drops, and the beadle gives the crank a testing turn. The cage shifts, creaks, then begins to spin slow at first, then faster until you can see the man's knees bend to keep balance. The first few revolutions are almost comical. A few in the crowd chuckle. Even the Reeve's fringe seems to bounce in rhythm. But after a minute, the man's jaw stops moving. His eyes fix on a point somewhere that refuses to stay still. The whirligig hum begins a constant whisper of rope and wood rubbing against the beam, underscored by the occasional squeak of the pulley. You feel your own stomach tilt in sympathy. It's the opposite of the mare's narrow stillness, the pillory's rigid weight. Here the punishment is motion without destination, a journey that leaves you exactly where you started, just less sure of the ground. Willem leans over and says softly, "Better than the stool in winter, worse than the stool in summer." You consider asking for a rating scale, then decide some mysteries are better unsolved. Joke 1 if the shame flute is a bad duet and the wheel is a bad dance floor. This is the town's worst carnival ride. The Reeve gestures for a pause and the beadle slows the crank. The cage drifts to a stop and the man inside sways like a mast in gentle swell. Questions are called: did he throw the stones? Was he drunk? Does he understand the damage to the baker's window? His answers are slow, mumbled. He nods once. The Reeve orders another spin for memory. The crank turns again, and the cage whirls. The motion is mesmerizing in a low, hypnotic way the river's current is hypnotic if you stare too long. Your eyes track the man's face when it flashes into view between bars, paler now, mouth pressed tight. You wonder how many turns it takes before the body loses count. The ink-cuffed clerk chooses this moment to speak. Some civic records show fines paid in advance to avoid the whirligig. Apparently shopkeepers preferred coins to the risk of, well. He twirls a hand vaguely at the spinning cage. Public sympathy wanes quickly when lunch is threatened. By the third round, the man's knees are bent deeply, his shoulders braced against the bars. The cage sways a little off its axis, which seems to make the effect worse. A boy in the crowd tries to spin in place to copy him, makes it halfway, and falls over laughing. The Reeve doesn't laugh. The beadle's turning slows again, then stops. The man grips the bars, breathing through his mouth, and the Reeve waves for the door to be opened. It takes him a few seconds to step out. His first step onto the cobbles goes sideways. The second finds ground. The crowd watches him find his balance. And you realize that's part of the show, the moment the punished man stands still again, proving that stillness now belongs to the town. He's led away quieter than when he arrived. The whirligig swings lightly in the breeze, empty but still moving as though it remembers the last hour. You can feel it in your own calves, the ghost spin. Joke 2, you think about suggesting the whirligig for market day entertainment. 2 turns for a turnip, but suspect the baker might throw stones at you. On your walk home, you can still hear the faint squeak of the pulley in your ears, matched to the memory of the man's pale face between bars. You tell yourself it's just a sound, just a passing picture. But later, lying in bed, the room shifts almost imperceptibly, and you realize the day has left you with your own small spin. Joke 3. You promise yourself no ladders tomorrow, just in case the ground and you are still negotiating. The first thing you notice is the way the morning light slides along the grain, long, pale strokes that turn rough wood into something almost gentle. Almost. The carpentry itself is simple, 2 planks heavy as arguments hinged on one short edge and board with a circle cut out in the middle. The circle isn't for wrists today. It's for a neck. A wooden collar bigger than a yoke, smaller than a door, exactly the size of your world if it's fastened around you. They bring it out from the church porch, where it leans like a sleepy ox, and the beetle pats it the way he patted the rat barrel carefully, like it might misunderstand his intentions. A rope is threaded through a hole on one side so it can be carried or less charmingly tethered to a post. The Reeves fringe is unusually tidy, as if respectability can be ironed on. Around you, the square rubs the sleep out of its eyes. Baker's steam, a broom scratching stone, a lute, testing a cautious scale that absolutely is not the shame flute, bless them. The culprit today. Not a traitor, not a brawler, not a river-tested case. A miller's apprentice who refused to sweep the lane after dropping chaff in it. A weaver's boy who talked back to the guild warden. A woman who set her stall past the chalk line and lectured the Reeve on geometry. The town hasn't picked one, it's picked 3. Petty disobedience bundled in scheduled efficiency you could set your watch by. The wooden collar loves small stuff. It's a device for nudging. Mainstream historical fact, folded neatly like a note under a door across the late medieval world. Public collars existed in cousins and dialects. In Scotland, the jogues, an iron ring on a chain bolted to kirkyard walls, held necks for hours of repentance. In German towns, Schankragen shame collars of wood or iron turned a person into street furniture for petty rule-breaking. And further east in Ming and earlier centuries, the Chinese kangai broad wooden boards worn at the neck made eating, sleeping, and passing a doorway a slow public lesson. Different timbers, same grammar carry your disobedience where everyone can read it. The beetle chooses the weaver's boy first. He's all elbows and opinions. The collar's hinge opens with a tired sigh. The circle frames his throat. Then the weight settles, a sudden, serious gravity that drags his shoulders down. He tries to lift instinctively, but the plank says, "No, you won't." He stands straighter instead because that hurts less, and you file that next to the heretic's fork posture as teacher. A short chain slips through the side hole and links to a ring on a low post. Not tight, just declarative. You drift to that ASMR hush. Your bones have learned a soft, steady voice inside your head that counts breaths and catalogs details while the rest of you watches. Wood smell sap, ghost, and sun. Rope smell, old harbor. The boy's breath is quick. A fly traces the collar's edge like it's reading. The blacksmith arms folded as ever watches the grain like a colleague. The miller's apprentice goes next. He gets the second collar nearly the same, only thicker. Someone misjudged the lumber, so his arms must rise slightly to balance it across his chest and back. The woman with the chalk-lined stall receives a narrower board with decorative scrollwork on the corners, as if someone tried to make a rude sign pretty. Quirky tidbit you can share later. In a whisper, some towns carved sayings into collars. Clean your doorstep, or tongues are small, trouble is large, so the wearer doubled as a billboard. Others fitted the edges with wooden pegs that knocked door frames when you tried to enter, guaranteeing you learned to pause exactly where the town preferred. There's even talk of a collar with a little shelf where a candle sat, penitents holding light for their own scolding at church doors. Whether that was common or just a priest's dream of tidy symbolism, historians still argue. The reeve reads short lines from a town ordinance, trimming them to the beat of morning commerce. The drummer from yesterday is nowhere to be seen, but you feel a phantom dum-dum-dum anyway. The march rhythm lives rent-free now. Willem of the Barrel leans against the pillory frame, respectful toward anyone currently auditioning for furniture. People don't jeer, they observe. There's a difference, and you can sense it like weather. Children come near stop, put their fingers on the collar's edge to feel the weight by proxy. The apple-giving woman sidles to the chalk-lined scholar and tucks, of course, she does a sprig of mint into the strap at her shoulder. Your running joke writes itself. Mint is the patron herb of mildly bad decisions. Joke 1, if the town ever launches a signature tea, it'll be peppermint with a hint of regulation. The first problem the wearers meet is movement. Turning is a negotiation. Wind is an editor. It flips a corner and reroutes your chin. When the miller's boy tries to scratch an ear, the collar says absolutely not. When a cart rattles by and everyone steps aside, the weaver's boy must wait for a path that fits him and his additional geometry. He learns patience in the language of inches. You notice how the town modulates time. The wheel was hours of heavy finality. The whirligig was minutes of motion. The collar splits the difference 3/4 of a morning. Long enough for a lesson, short enough to let the bakery still sell out by noon. Somewhere in the council hall, that panel of Cambyses sits in its honey light, a grand moral addressed to judges. Here the message is smaller, aimed at street-level governance. Keep the lane clear. Mind the chalk line. Say I before actually. A clerk wanders by, the one ink on Cuff's archive in his pockets. In France, he murmurs the carcan, an iron collar on a post graced market squares in the later Middle Ages. Documents mention names, times, and sometimes the exact angle of the sun when the culprit was released, because clerks cannot resist angles. He half smiles, then adds, and the Chinese cangue had its own paperwork boards inscribed with the offense, even weights specified by law, heavier for heavier sins. Travelers wrote about it the way travelers always do, half accuracy, half theater. He glances at the collars before us. We kept the theater, adjusted the weight. You mark the little social choreography around the wearers. Friends bring sips of water in bowls, a complicated exercise now that you can't lift a hand to a mouth. One helper tilts, another wipes a chin, the way the beadle held a ladle at the wooden mare. A boy tries to be clever and offers a pear. The chalk-line woman gives him a stare so precise it should be notarized, and he retreats into the general population, wiser by one fruit. Joke 2, you picture a sign, do not feed the collared unless you enjoy being glared into next week. A man from the next village wanders in and volunteers that his town's collar had bells attached, so you made music with every step. Willem deadpans. If the shame flute wants to collaborate, I'll pass. The man doesn't get it, which is for the best. The shame flute should stay retired to its niche. By the second hour, you can see the fatigue creep in. The weaver's boy's shoulders tremble. The miller's apprentice shifts weight foot to foot. The chalk-line woman rolls her eyes with a virtuosity that deserves an audience. The beadle watches for real distress, and adjusts nothing because the device is doing exactly what it was built to do, make small defiance heavier than it first felt. Historians still argue whether most medieval towns used wooden collars often, or merely liked to have them leaning in the porch as a deterrent. Sudden surges in the records, 3 mentions in 1 decade here, a dry spell. There might mean fads in enforcement or simply fads in clerks who loved noting collars in the margins. You can almost hear them centuries away, item woman with plank, item boy with plank. Item this handwriting will be the death of me. The reeve eventually raises his hand like a conductor releasing a last note. The beetle steps in, lifts the latch, and the sound the hinge makes a soft wooden exhale is a sort of applause if you're in a generous mood. The collars lift free, and the world returns to ordinary proportions. The miller's boy rubs his neck and mutters something thoroughly respectful. The weaver's boy manages a sorry that at least uses the right mouth muscles. The chalk-lined woman accepts her mint back like a medal and resumes her stall exactly 1 inch inside the boundary. Progress is measurable. Before the crowd disperses, there's a final errand. The beetle walks the 3 around the square collars, hoisted sideways by assistants like strange flat standards in a procession. Not for spectacle now, but for memory. You walk 2 a step back, because you've started collecting closings like other people collect prayer beads. The river laps lazily at its bend. The whirligig's rope creaks once in a bored little breeze. The pillory's wood smells of yesterday's sun. The mare waits polite triangle. The cat o' 9 tails dozes on its peg in the guard yard. The Iron Maiden stands where they left it, a statue with a secret. The wheel sits in your peripheral imagination, even when the square politely forgets it. And somewhere in all of that mint peas in shoes, bells, panels, you discover you are walking taller than you did a month ago because you have learned to carry invisible weights and put them down carefully. Joke 3, you consider opening a mindfulness class. Posture peas and planks, but decide that the reeve would insist on being a guest instructor, and your tongue prefers to remain unbridled. At home, you lay your palm on your own table's edge and feel the wood answer with that friendly, indifferent warmth. Your neck muscles, loyal and curious, catalog the day's empathy cramps like a list. You pour water, and the ring it leaves on the board reminds you of the iron brand's glow and the brazier's breath and things you didn't see in the alley because you chose to look away when looking would have been too much. You're getting good at that, knowing when to angle your eyes and when to meet the square head-on. Before sleep, you rehearse the town's lesson in the calm voice you save for yourself. Sometimes punishment isn't a thunderclap. It's a hand on the shoulder saying, "Stand here." Learn the size of your choices. It's not noble. It's not kind. It's not nothing. In a place that loves props, the wooden collar is one of the light ones, and somehow it still manages to weigh more than it looks. You lower your head to the pillow, grateful for straps that aren't there for hinges, that stay quiet for a neck that belongs to you. Your last thought before the dark carries you is simple and smug. Today, you did not test any chalk lines. The council hall smells faintly of damp parchment and heated metal, never a promising combination. You know before you even see it that today won't be about wood or rope or postures. It's iron's turn again. The blacksmith is here, sleeves rolled, forearms shining with a sheen that could be sweat, or just the natural gloss of someone who lives half his life beside a forge. In his hands is a device that looks deceptively simple. 2 curved iron plates hinged on one side, threaded with a long screw on the other. It could almost pass for a press, the kind used to flatten parchment, except the interfaces are not smooth. They're ridged, meant to cradle a knee, one plate in front, one behind. The screw is a heavy threaded promise. The beetle sets it on a stout bench, the metal clinking faintly against the wood, and the sound alone makes your own knees feel suddenly self-conscious. The Reeve stands ready with his sheet of charges theft from the armory assault on a guard refusal to give names. The culprit is a broad-shouldered man whose walk still carries a swagger even in shackles. His legs are bare from mid-thigh down the better to make the point, and to give the audience no doubt about the target. Mainstream historical fact knee-crushing devices like this appear in scattered records from late medieval Europe, especially in judicial torture inventories. Some were called boot or Spanish boot, though those could also refer to leg-crushing devices for shin and calf. The knee variant was rarer, but documented Scotland, for example, used a kind of iron casing tightened by wedges to interrogate high-profile prisoners. The design varied, but the principle was simple. Enclose the joint, then apply force until compliance or incapacity. Quirky tidbit: in some cases, wedges of wood were driven between the plates. Instead of turning a screw, the executioner tapping them in with a mallet slower, but with a certain theater, the sound announcing each degree of tightening. One French account even claims the wedges were soaked in water first, so they would swell over time, increasing pressure without a hand nearby. Whether this was common or just a scribe's grisly flourish, historians still argue. The man is made to sit, his leg extended forward. The plates are placed around his knee, front plate, smooth back plate, ridged like a washboard. The hinge closes the screw threads into its waiting hole. The blacksmith stands at one side, a slow turner of fate. The first twist is almost polite, like the firm handshake of a stranger. The second changes the handshake to a grip. The man's jaw tenses. By the third, his breath catches in his throat. You notice the blacksmith's face is calm, as though he's adjusting a saddle girth rather than calibrating a human threshold. The Reeve repeats the question about names. The man shakes his head once, a movement that makes the plates clink. The screw turns again, half a rotation this time measured. Willem of the barrel leans against a pillar, arms crossed. Better than the wheel, he murmurs, worse than the collar. You decide his internal scale is worth publishing someday. One imagine it printed as the Willem Guide to Civic Comforts, with star ratings and footnotes. The knee, you realize, is a strange target. It's neither as showy as a face nor as final as a neck, but it's essential to standing, to moving. Threaten it, and you're threatening a person's ability to walk away from here unchanged. The man's hands twitch, not from trying to pull free, but from some deeper instinct to guard the joint. The plates, of course, don't care. The clerk with the ink cuffs sidles up beside you. In Scotland, he whispers there's record of the boot being used on noblemen suspected of treason. The notes are clinical: how many wedges, how long before the confession. They rarely mention what came after. His voice dips, and in some German states they say the same device served to immobilize rather than crush when a trial was to be delayed, but the prisoner not lost. He gives a small shrug. Deterrence and utility often shared a workshop. The Reeve asks again. This time the man exhales hard through his nose, as if that could push the question away. The blacksmith waits for a nod, doesn't get one, and gives the screw another careful turn. The joint inside those plates has a limit, and every sound, the faint grind of threads, the muted creak of the hinge, sounds like a clock counting down to it. The crowd is quieter than usual. Even the apple-giving woman doesn't produce her mint sprig. A child whispers something, and the mother shushes, not from disapproval, but from that instinct to soften noise when a moment is about to tip from stubbornness to surrender. It happens on the next half-turn. The man's lips part, and the first name drops out. It's followed by another before the Reeve even asks. The blacksmith stops turning but doesn't release. The man offers a place, a description, and finally, a plan. Only when the reeve nods to the beetle does the screw reverse plate by plate, tension unwinding like a storm easing. Quirky detail for your notes: as the plates open, you can see faint impressions on the skin, ridged from the metal's pattern. Temporary marks, but enough to make the point without permanence. The man's leg bends slowly, the knee stiff. He's helped to his feet, his weight shifted to the other side. The plates are wiped with an oiled rag, hinge checked, screw backed out to rest. The blacksmith returns them to their place on the bench, as if setting down any other tool. Joke 2. You briefly imagine the device marketed as a knee straightener for posture with disastrous results and many refunds. The reeve announces that the man will be held in the guardhouse until further orders. No one applauds, but no one protests. The device has done what it came to do quietly, precisely, with none of the spinning, swinging, or splashing the town often prefers. As you leave, you glance back at the plates. They sit closed, now resting. From here, they look almost like a giant's handcuffs. The thought stays with you. Some punishments announce themselves in the square. Others live in the room with the door shut, working on memory long after the hinge has stopped moving. Joke 3. You decide to walk home slowly, just to remind your knees how much you appreciate them. The square wears a morning hush that feels deliberate, like someone pressed a palm on the town's crown and said, "Quiet now." A new frame has been set near the market cross, 2 stout uprights, and a crossbar simple joinery rope already thrown over and tied to a windlass the blacksmith has checked 3 times for honest friction. The rope drapes in an easy loop that has nothing easy about it. It sways a little in the breeze, whispering against the wood with a sound like cloth being folded. They call it the rope dance. The name arrives in your ear with that small town brightness that makes everything sound friendlier than it is, like how the cucking stool became a seat and the whirligig a ride. You step closer, soft-footed breath, already practicing the slow rhythm your ribs learned under the bridle and by the river's plank. If pain is theater here, today's show is about air. The beetle stands by the windlass, palms on the handles. The reeve's fringe has achieved an anxious loft, as if it's rehearsing a solo. Willem of the barrel leans against a post, face tucked into a seriousness you've learned to trust. The apple-giving woman waits with her basket. You can guess the herb riding along. The ink-cuffed clerk is present, slate under his arm like a bird that refuses to fly. The condemned, no, not condemned, not quite, steps forward on rope-hobbled ankles. Thief thrice, the reeve intones, and liar once for variety. A murmur rolls the edge of the crowd. The man is no stranger to the square. You recognize his profile from pillory days and from the time he insisted the mint sprigs at the herb stall were counterfeit. They were not. He swallows, glances at the rope, and then at the ground, as if trying to negotiate with gravity before the meeting starts. The loop isn't for arms today, or at least not at first. It's for the neck, short and honest, no trap. No drop, just enough bite to turn breath into work. The beetle explains the rules as if they're posted in a hall he'll hoist until toes just brush the cobbles, then hold. Lower for questions. Lift again if answers come slow. Keep the intervals steady until the hour turns. Dance, someone whispers, and you feel the square draw closer by a thumb width. Mainstream historical fact settles beside your shoulder like a teacher in the later Middle Ages and well into the early modern period. Most hangings were short drop or no drop, the neck unbroken death when intended by slow strangulation. Surviving when a lesson rather than an execution was the point meant the rope bit, but did not close toes, scraping legs, pushing breath, snatching in hiccuped mouthfuls. London slang later called it the Tyburn jig, the involuntary kicking, that made observers claim the hanged danced. On the continent, records speak of Lufthansa's air dance for partial suspensions used as public penance. The dance was not a metaphor, it was physics witnessed by neighbors. The rope settles around the man's neck, the knot off-center the way careful hands place it to grip without slicing. The beetle tightens, testing. A priest mutters a line that promises nothing specific. The windlass turns. The rope hums. The man rises the smallest distance you've ever seen, measured an inch, maybe 2. Toes kiss the cobbles and then lose them. They return in tiny, frantic counts. The body begins its math calves, begging the ground neck, negotiating with the loop lungs, negotiating with everyone. It does look like a dance in the way that balancing on the mare's ridge looked like learning a step, hips, adjusting shoulders, trying to square what cannot be squared. The crowd shifts nearly on tiptoe themselves. You feel your own heels lift in sympathy, a ghost towing the cobbles through your shoes. Joke 1. If the town ever opens a fitness class, rope bar will be wildly unpopular and extremely effective. The Reeve asks the first question, names, of course, then haunts and hours. The hoist holds. The man's feet write little letters on the air, looking for a line to underline and failing. When his reply comes, it is a whisper so thin the apple-giving woman tilts her head to hear. A nod from the Reeve and the beetle eases the handle half a turn. The rope slackens, toes land, breath tumbles in. The sound the man makes is not grateful. It's mechanical, like bellows finding their rhythm again. A few words, not enough. The windlass turns back up. The dance resumes. Quirky tidbit arrives with the clerk voice pitched low for the polite in some towns, a small stool or stone. The mercy block sat beneath the dancer's toes, slid in and out by the beetle to measure the town's patience. Sometimes he says a feather was held under the nose in jesting bravado to prove breath still came. Sometimes the dancer was offered a sip of ale between hoists, to wet the rope with humor which you hope is apocryphal, though you know how people tell stories when markets need new laughter. Historians still argue whether those details were standard practice street rumor or broadsheet embroidery sold 2 towns over to spice an otherwise earnest penance. On the second lift, the man's hands, though, untied, stay at his sides by will or rule. He flexes his fingers like a musician warming up for a song he wishes he didn't know. His toes scuff the stone, find nothing, scuff again. The rope creaks with each micro-rise of his chest. You've heard rope voices now, the dunking line's wet rasp, the whirligig's pulley squeak, the cat's quiet coil on a peg. This one speaks in breath lengths. Willem shifts closer, and without looking at you murmurs he'll learn the secret. You raise an eyebrow in the language you two have developed, and that is, breath out first, he says. Hoist on empty when you can. Less fight in the rope then. You store it away with Count Dragonflies and sit straight town survival tips in a pocket notebook no one sees. The beetle lowers. The man coughs a word, cellar, another hoist. The small, involuntary dance returns, knees, ticking feet, sketching arcs that will fade before the hour does. You think of the whirligig and how it forced motion on a body. This forces motion on air, making it scarce, so that every small push of a toe is a petition. You find yourself frozen like a priest at a lectern who forgets the next line. Breathe, your bridal memory whispers. Breathe through your nose. You do, and the square lowers again to its ordinary size. The ink-cuffed clerk slides in his mainstream footnote with an apologetic softness. German city ordinances list hoisting and lowering at the rope for market cheats and petty thieves. Numbers of lifts, specified witnesses named, bells rung to gather a crowd. In England, sheriffs sometimes used a partial hoist at the gallows, for those reprieved at the last instant, letting them taste the halter before a pardon. And in the North Church, penances sometimes required standing under a rope with the noose visible but untouched symbol, doing work on the imagination. He pauses. It works on mine. Yours too today, the Reeve asks again. The man's feet find the cobbles as the beetle gifts him a 2 count. Back room, he says, voice a brown paper whisper. The rope climbs. The woman with the basket edges a step nearer Mint, already between fingers. You almost smile Mint again, but hold it because breath jokes belong to a softer hour. Joke 2. Still your brain drafts a poster, Mint now with added oxygen. On the 4th lift, the man's face changes. The frantic scan for stone becomes a concentrated press, the way you press against the mare's beam when you decide to stop fidgeting and ride it out. His toes touch the world, and then don't. He chooses his own count instead of letting panic count for him. Even the rope seems to respect that humming a steadier note. He gives a name you've never heard and a place you've walked past 100 times without noticing a shutter painted the color of stale ale near the Cambyses panel's door. The Reeves pen scratches the slate with the firm joy of a man who believes in lists. The beetle lowers 2 turns this time, and air arrives like a friend you doubted would show. All the while, the crowd practices its own postures. Some look down, studying shoes as if cobblers are suddenly philosophers. Others watch openly with the practical curiosity of people who understand that any device used on a neighbor belongs to the town, in the way a well or a clock does, shared, debated, unavoidable. A boy raises onto his toes to see, then drops, chastened by his own muscles. You want to tell him about peas and shoes and decide against it. Some knowledge should arrive later and gentler. Historians still argue whether rope dance sentences were codified penalties or ad hoc corrections that grew out of execution technique in smaller places without formal scaffolds. They argue too whether the phrase dance was used then or polished later by ballad singers with a taste for ghastly grace notes. You think the arguments miss the small truth visible here: rope plus breath plus time turns anyone into a choreographer, whether they want the part or not. The beetle signals the last lift, and it's the highest by a finger. The man's toes misfind miss, and then stillness visits his face for a heartbeat, a strange calm in the middle of the air. He nods, tiny but verified by everyone close enough to see. When he comes down, he does in a slow slide that looks almost practiced. He offers 2 more names without prompting, like exhale after a too long inhale. The windlass unwinds completely. The loop loosens and falls away. The rope swings empty, remembering. The Reeve reads a sentence that tastes like compromise. A fine a season's ban from the market work. 2 days on the town ditch under watch, and 1 afternoon at the pillory's side holding a sign that says what everyone already knows. You catch your mind, making a tally: river, cold, bridle, bite, shame, flute, honk, mare, ridge, cat, crack, brand, heat, maiden, hush, wheel, geometry, drum, cadence, whirligig, spin, collar, weight, knee, screw, rope, air. The town composes with different instruments. Today's melody is breath. The apple-giving woman steps forward, and with all the unflashy ceremony this square allows, holds her mint sprig and a wooden cup to the man's mouth. He drinks, coughs, drinks again. She tucks the mint into the rope burn at his collarbone like a green comma, a pause that fixes nothing and means everything. Willem tilts 2 fingers, his version of applause. The blacksmith inspects the windlass pawl with exaggerated focus, the way a man looks at a tool when he'd rather not look anywhere else. Joke 3, you consider nominating Mint for town alderman. It already shows up to more civic duties than the notary's hat. As people drift, the clerk murmurs one last tidbit. In some places they sold inches of gallows rope, as relics, luck, protection, bravado. You both make the same face, no. Even the Reeves fringe would refuse to bless that commerce. On your walk home, the rope's whisper follows down the lane, plucking at your shoulder like an insistent child. You lengthen your breath on purpose, 4 and 6, out the way you did after the river, when the world needed to be told you were still in it. You pass the council hall. The panel of canvases glows the color of tea and afternoon light. You pass the whirligig. Its pulley makes a single sleep squeak. You pass the pillory. Its wood is warm again, innocent as furniture until noon. At your door, you pause and stand on tiptoe just to feel the stretch in your calves, the river memory in your ribs, the bridal memory in your tongue, the rope's lesson in your throat. The floor greets your heels with a relief your bones name aloud without words. Inside, you set a sprig of mint in a cup because you're superstitious now, and because the room smells better that way. You drink water slow. You tell your chest gently all the air you want. It believes you eventually. Night comes on like someone laying a cool cloth on a hot brow. You lie back, listen for the square's breathing, and add yours to it, a steady line, in a town that makes music from what it takes and what it gives back. It's the smell you catch, first oily sharp, a little like roasted chestnuts, if chestnuts had opinions about vengeance. The blacksmith has been working since dawn, coaxing heat from the forge, until it glows that deep orange you can feel in your teeth. Against the stone wall leans the tool of the hour, a branding iron, its shaft, the length of a man's arm, its head shaped into a single oversized letter you can read even upside down. The serifed edges make it look almost decorative, like a typeface trying to dress up for market day. The crowd this morning is thinner, not for lack of interest, but because branding days don't require as much audience space, just enough to stand back from heat and from whatever sound a person makes when skin meets symbol. Still, you spot the regulars. Willem of the Barrel Arms folded, the apple-giving woman with her mint, the ink-cuffed clerk already tilting his head like he's writing the script in invisible ink. The culprit is led forward, a merchant boots, muddy tunic fine but stained at the hem. The Reeve reads the charges in that clipped way that says the list is longer than time allows. Fraud, false measures, 3 instances of selling goods far past their prime. In a market town that's as close to heresy as bread gets. Mainstream historical fact branding as punishment goes back long before the Middle Ages, but in the medieval and early modern periods, it became a shorthand for marking thieves, forgers, and repeat offenders. England's laws under Henry VII and later Elizabeth prescribed letters T for thief, F for felon, fell, for vagrant burned into the hand or cheek. In France, the fleur-de-lis served the same purpose for criminals sent to the galleys. Placement mattered, a cheek mark shouted to everyone, a hand mark whispered to those who traded coin or goods. Quirky tidbit, some towns branded on the shoulder, so clothing could hide it, using the mark as an internal registry rather than a public shaming. Others used heated stamps on wooden tallies for a kind of proof of punishment that could be shown without showing flesh. Historians still argue whether the hidden marks were meant to be merciful or simply made reoffending easier to track. The blacksmith pulls the iron from the forge, the glow climbing the shaft like a slow sunrise. Heat blooms out from it in soft pulses. Even from where you stand, the warmth taps your cheek. The merchant sees it and stiffens an involuntary salute to physics. The Reeve asks for last words. The merchant offers none. His eyes follow the iron like it's a snake deciding whether to strike high or low. The beetle takes his left hand palm down and presses it to a flat plank, fingers spread. The merchant tries to make his hand into something boneless, to pull it away without pulling it away, but the beetle's grip is steady. The iron's hiss is a sound your skin understands before your mind does. The letter meets the web of flesh between thumb and forefinger, and the merchant's breath leaves him in a single hard syllable. It's not a scream. It's more like the noise a bellows makes when you drop it. The iron lifts. The brand is perfect. The edges crisp, a darkening already ghosting around the line. Willem mutters, "Better than the cheek." You know he's right. There's no hiding a face mark, no reclaiming it with gloves. Joke 1, you imagine a fashion trend of suspiciously heavy mittens in summer. The blacksmith returns the iron to the forge, the glow dimming along its shaft as it goes. The beetle releases the merchant's hand. He cradles it against his chest, the branded flesh already tightening the skin's memory, being rewritten letter by letter. The ink-cuffed clerk sidles up. In some cases, he says a second brand was added if the first crime was repeated. Double letters for double shame. There's a case from Rouen Vivau for vagrant, then vagrant again. The man joked it stood for his initials. They didn't like that. He smirks slightly. Historians still argue whether humor helped or hurt under such regimes. The reeve announces the fine enough to sting, not enough to ruin, and a ban from the market for 6 months. The merchant nods once, still watching his hand, like it might tell him something new if he stares long enough. You glance at the forge. The iron rests now in its heat, no longer glowing, looking as harmless as any piece of scrap. You think of the wheel's geometry, the mare's ridge, the rope's dance devices that needed you to be inside them for their lesson to work. The brand works after you've left, walking beside you into every handshake, every coin exchange. The apple-giving woman steps forward, not with mint this time, but with a small bowl of cool water. The merchant dips his hand in the hiss, softer now, but no less pointed. Steam curls up and disappears into the morning. Joke 2, you consider bottling branding steam as a local cure-all and decide the town has enough questionable merchandise. As people drift away, the merchant stays a moment longer, letting the water lap over the wound. The beetle wipes the iron's head clean, checking the edges the way a calligrapher checks a quill. The blacksmith looks satisfied in the quiet way of someone whose work leaves no room for gloating. You leave the square with the scent of heated metal in your nose, a smell that lingers even after the air cools. You rub your own hand without thinking, feeling the smooth skin where no letter lives. Joke 3. You half promise yourself to never sell bad apples, mostly because you'd have to explain to the mint woman why she can't hide a cheek mark with leaves. That night, when you set your hands on your table, you look at the backs of them for longer than usual. They look the same as yesterday, but you know better now they're just unmarked, not innocent. You blow on your fingers once the way you might after touching a hot kettle, and the ghost of the forge warms you all over again. They bring it out from the shed behind the guardhouse like a reluctant actor being shoved on stage, the wheelbarrow, with the personality of a sigh. The wood sides are scuffed smooth by years of cargo. The single front wheel is iron-banded and a little oval from hard living, which means it doesn't roll so much as remember every pebble in town. 2 handles jut back like a shrug. Someone has tied a modest sign to the side with twine, idler cheat, and general nuisance. It's honest, if not poetic. You touch the handle the way you touched the mare's beam, the pillory's wood, the whirligig's bars, a small private handshake with today's lesson. The beetle flips the sign so it faces outward. The reeve's fringe arrives 2 heartbeats later, fully composed, like it has a rehearsal schedule. He reads the short charge sheet. You skipped 3 work levies on the town ditch, borrowed a neighbor's shovel for a fortnight, and loudly explained the finer points of geometry to the reeve while moving your stall a finger width past the chalk line. The square appreciates continuity. It remembers your chalk line phase. Today's sentence is tidy, push the town's wheelbarrow from the guardhouse to the far gate and back again, stopping at the market. Cross the church porch, the mill path, and the river bend. Cargo included. The cargo is stones river-rounded, heavy enough to feel like a scolding. Someone has chalked a little tally on the side, 5 stops, 5 handfuls to unload at each for the ditch you didn't dig. You admire the paperwork of it. This place loves turning annoyance into arithmetic. Willem of the Barrel appears on cue, arms folded, expression sympathetic. Keep your elbows close, he murmurs, or you'll wear your shoulders out by the mill. You nod like a novice in a guild you never asked to join. The drummer boy from the march leans his sticks against his shoulder and offers "want to beat." The reeve cuts him a look. The fringe does a tiny shudder. No drum today. The wheelbarrow will provide its own music. You grip the handles and the world tilts forward. The first step is easy in the way all first steps lie to you. The second step brings the wheel to the ribbed line where 2 cobbles meet and the barrow lurches like a hiccup. Stones knock in their bed. The sign thumps the side like applause. The crowd follows in that practiced half-moon. Not cruel, just ready to be convinced that work plus walking equals lesson. Mainstream historical fact rolls alongside in parts of the German-speaking world and the Low Countries from the late Middle Ages into the early modern period. Petty offenders were sentenced to Schubkarrenstrafe. The wheelbarrow penalty, pushing a laden barrow through set routes while townsfolk watched or joined. English towns kept cousins of the practice carting or putting someone in a dung cart for insults, or making debtors push loads as penance, while French cities loved a walk with visible labor candle or stone in hand as amende honorable. The point wasn't distance, it was display attached to duty. The clerk with the ink cuffs drifts in at your elbow like a helpful footnote. In Ulm, he says quietly, delighted they recorded exactly how many streets constituted a proper wheelbarrow turn for a gossip. And in some Dutch towns, they fixed a little board on the barrow, with the offense painted in neat letters, so even the ill-informed could be informed. He glances at your sign. Yours has a certain compact charm. You hit the first incline by the market cross, barely a hill, but perfectly placed to expose the math of wheels and gravity. Your shoulders protest. Your palms learn the handle's splinters by name. The sign taps the rhythm of "should have shown up" against the slat. Someone calls steady there as if you're hauling glass. You are hauling dignity. It's fragile enough. At the cross, the beetle lifts a hand. Stop one. You tip the barrow forward. The stones tumble into a tidy, cobble-sized pile. A boy claps as if you performed a trick with timing. The apple-giving woman steps in close, of course she does, and tucks a green sprig between the binding twine and the barrow's lip. Mint again. She smiles with that same mild defiance that once walked an apple past the bridle's strap. For the smell, she says. It helps. The wheelbarrow smells like old damp iron and instruction. Mint negotiates. You set off again. The wheel finds every flaw in the street like it was trained by a mason. People step aside for you in little ways, a courtesy freighted with amusement. You feel the attention on your back, the way you felt the brank's pressure on your tongue, constant, not cruel, insistent. Your breath finds that slow cadence you learned under the rope and by the river's plank. In through the nose, out longer. Count dragonflies, no count flagstones. Quirky tidbit rolls in on a whisper from a man in a featherless cap in his cousin's town. The wheelbarrow for chronic idlers wasn't empty or full of stones. It carried a stuffed straw figure dressed like the offender paraded around, as if the town couldn't be bothered to wait for the real person to find time. In another place, the barrow was painted with smiling suns, and a moral line, "Labor loves the early riser." and children were bribed with gingerbread to walk behind and chant. Whether those adornments were common practice or just the oddities of proud councils with creative budgets, historians still argue. At the church porch, stop 2, you unload more stones. A priest nods, not disapproving. He looks, in fact, like a man who would love to have stones appear at the foot of the path every morning with no discussion. He says nothing as you pant. You hear your own breath echo under the porch arch, a soft, wheezy ghost of the shame flute's squeal. You'd laugh if laughing didn't steal oxygen. Back on the lane, the wheel announces the mill path by catching the edge where cobble gives way to packed dirt. The barrow jounces, the load shifts, the handles try to teach you about leverage the hard way. Willem calls elbows with the benign cruelty of correct advice arriving late. You correct. It works. You trade your shoulder's complaint for your wrist's loud opinion. Noted. The miller's apprentice, fresh from his own collar day, watches you from the shade neck, free eyes bright with the dangerous joy of someone who is not you today. He offers water in a ladle, and you drink without spilling a skill the bridal practice quietly honed. It gets easier, he lies. You thank him anyway, because kindness is a mint sprig too. Stop 3 is the mill path marker, a stump that from this angle looks like a judge who forgot his wig. You spill stones, count them aloud, so the clerk can nod 5, the tally chalked and satisfied. The drummer boy appears without sticks and taps the barrow's side with a finger in triplets, dumb habit more than mischief. You smile despite yourself. The beat in your calves returns more gently than yesterday. The route tilts toward the river bend. The barrow tries to drift downhill, which would be delightful if the wheel weren't a small anarchist. You steer in a slow S, the way you sidestepped wake after a dunk. The river itself lies quiet, silver, and indifferent, the same water that once voted in public about your character, now hosting dragonflies who couldn't care less. You set the barrow down at stop 4 and let the handles rest against your thighs. Your breath pitches low. Willem saunters up with a grin that means you're almost funny. See, he says. Fitness class. Elbows, planks, stones. We'll be our own saints. You grunt. It's the most eloquent response available. You catch sight of your reflection in a ripple, sweat-damp hair cheeks, warm a tiny river of grime curled along your forearm like an accidental tattoo. The sign on the barrow bobs in the reflection, idler cheat and general nuisance. You mouth it once, privately. You've worn worse titles for shorter times. The brand on that merchant's hand will outlast your afternoon. Still, you feel the mark of this day inside your shoulders. A different kind of letter. On the climb back toward the square, the wheel starts its commentary again, a squeak that sounds exactly like the whirligig's pulley when it wants to be dramatic. Your hands burn now a slow, reasonable heat. The mint sprig waves its little flag at every bump. The reeve walks alongside for a stretch fringe, steady expression, an official blend of stern and satisfied. Stones at each stop, he reminds, as if you might unload your duty in one convenient heap behind the tavern and call it quits. You don't. Not because of the reeve, because of the ditch. At the market cross, again stop 5, you pour the last stones in a neat pile. The clerk counts, but he doesn't need to. Everyone has counted with their eyes. The drummer boy lets his finger tap a little flourish on the barrow rim, a non-verbal bravo. Someone, bless them, hands you a wedge of bread with a smear of soft cheese. You take a bite. It's unreasonably good. Joke 1, you consider applying for a grant to study how penance improves flavor perception. The beetle holds up a palm. Not done. The barrow must go to the far gate and back, empty proof that carrying a name around town matters even when it isn't weighed down with stones. So you go. The crowd thins to a lazy escort of the faithful Willem the apple woman, the clerk, two kids who are here for the squeak. You pass the council hall. The panel of canvases glows like tea again. For a moment, your barrow's sign and the judge's painted fate form a diptych of small and large warnings. Everyone gets their size of lesson. On the empty leg, you notice the landscape of your town in a way you don't when you're simply hurrying the slight rightward cant of the lane by the Coopers, the friendly notch in the cobble outside the herb stall where you've stubbed your toe more times than you'll admit, the exact place the wind turns the reeve's fringe into a weather vane. You listen for the whirligig's rope. It answers with a sleepy squeak. The pillory's wood smells like someone rubbed it with bread crust. The Iron Maiden sulks where it stands. The wheel is blessedly out of sight. By the time you wheel back into the square, your shoulders have gone past complaint into the calm, stubborn country that comes after the place you visited on the mare when you decided to sit still and survive shape. The beetle steps forward, hand on the handle. He says enough like he means it. He turns the sign inward, loosens the twine, and looks for a moment, as if he might pocket the mint sprig. He doesn't. He tucks it behind your ear with a craftsman's care. The crowd doesn't cheer. They exhale, which is better. The reeve announces the rest, a day repairing the ditch with a proper shovel, thank you, and a week of market stall inspection by a person who knows lines. You humorously do not glance at the chalk woman. Joke 2, you nearly ask whether the line inspector wears a special hat. Then you remember the notary's feather and decide the square has suffered enough millinery. As people peel away toward bread gossip and the noon sun, Willem taps the wheelbarrow's rim with a knuckle. You're in the club, he says. We meet on days ending in day. You smile because he's not wrong. In a town that punishes by turning you into a moving sign, everyone ends up enrolled. You push the empty barrow back to the shed with the beetle. The shed smells like sap and oil and the complicated compromise of civic order. Inside sits a second barrow, newer, with a wheel that doesn't squeak and handles that haven't met 100 palms. The beetle pats the old one the way he patted the rat barrel, and the collar's a tenderness that doesn't quite absolve anything but points at care. Good tool, he says. Says what it means. On your way home, your hands remember the handles even when they're no longer there. Your shoulders wear the weight like a shawl the wind can't lift yet. You pass the ditch and glance down into it. Your stones glint under a skin of dust, modest and real. Work that didn't happen now exists. If the town has an honest grace, this is it. You turn onto your lane, mint leaf still cocked above your ear like a little laurel of better intentions. The wheelbarrow squeak has followed you into your bones, but it's harmless in there, like a cricket you decide to befriend. Joke 3. You tell yourself you'll oil your own door hinge before bed, just to feel like you control at least one squeak in this village. At your table, you lay your palms on the wood, check them for blisters the way you check your tongue for iron ghosts and your neck for rope memory. You pour water and watch it settle. You don't need the fan tonight. The day's breath is enough. You close your eyes, and somewhere in the background of your mind, a wheel rolls and finds its line steady, not perfect, not penitent exactly, just honest. The kind of rolling that gets work done. The sky is the color of hammered pewter, the kind that promises rain without committing. You feel it in your teeth before you hear it in the air, a low, distant mutter that could be weather or mood. The square is quieter than usual, but the council hall door stands open, and that means today isn't going to pass without an audience. You see the object before you see the culprit, a pair of iron frames, each shaped like an elongated figure 8 hinged at the middle so they can close like a jaw. Each loop is wide enough for a leg from knee to ankle. And inside, the curves are set thick round pegs, spaced just far enough apart to make the imagination wince. The blacksmith calls it the shin splitter, though the reeve, more official, prefers wooden boot, even though it's iron. The name is older than the metal. The beetle rolls it out on a handcart, setting it on a low trestle. Even without the heat of a forge, it has a presence, the kind of tool that looks like it could ruin your afternoon and your month at the same time. The culprit is a farmer with the kind of legs that look like they could outrun trouble, except trouble has better stamina. He's accused of refusing to pay tithe twice and chasing the tithe collector off his land with a rake. The reeve's fringe leans forward like it's listening extra hard. Mainstream historical fact: in the late medieval and early modern periods, devices called boots or Spanish boots were used across Europe for interrogation and punishment. The most infamous crushed the lower legs between wooden or iron boards by driving in wedges or tightening screws. Variants targeted shins, specifically placing them between ridged bars or studded surfaces, then adding pressure until the flesh and bone protested in earnest. Scotland's records describe nobles subjected to the boot for treason. Continental city accounts list boots for thieves and conspirators. Quirky tidbit: in some accounts, the pegs inside the boot were wrapped in oiled leather, first allegedly to protect the skin while still crushing the bone. Whether this was out of genuine concern or to prolong the ordeal, historians still argue. One Swiss chronicle claims that certain city guards would hum a tune while turning the screws, timing their work to the verse length. That one, you hope, is a bard's exaggeration, though you've learned not to put bets on medieval restraint. The farmer is seated on a sturdy bench. His right leg is guided into the lower loop shin, resting along the pegs. The top loop closes, locking his leg in place so neatly that you think of a chest being shut against damp. The hinge clicks. The beetle steps back, and the blacksmith takes over with the screw handle. The first turn is unremarkable enough to make the pegs greet the skin. The second turn brings the first sound from the farmer, a sharp inhale through his nose. You can see the muscles in his jaw working the same rhythm you saw in the rope dancer's calves yesterday. The reeve asks the predictable, will he pay? Will he return the tithe's worth? Will he swear to leave the collector unmolested? The farmer shakes his head after each, the pegs nudging his resolve tighter. Willem leans on the nearby post, eyes narrow. Shins are honest. He mutters almost to himself. They don't lie about pressure. You glance down at your own legs, grateful for their anonymity today. Joke 1, you imagine a pamphlet, Honest Shins and How to Keep Them Out of Trouble, sold by the reeve's office. The blacksmith turns the handle again. The pegs press deeper into the shin's front ridge, a place with no softness to bargain with. The farmer's hands curl into the bench edge. A bead of sweat works its way down his temple, slow as a cart on a rutted lane. The ink-cuffed clerk appears at your elbow like a scholastic shadow. In certain towns, he murmurs boots were a last step before banishment meant to make walking away less appealing. And in some places, they'd place cold water on the victim's brow between turns, not for kindness, but to keep them conscious. The records are silent on whether anyone appreciated the gesture. He adds, historians still argue whether the boot came to the British Isles via the continent or was invented locally. I think they argue to keep from thinking too long about it. The farmer exhales through clenched teeth, the sound somewhere between a hiss and a hum. The reeve repeats his questions. There's no reply. The handle turns again, and you can almost hear the pressure metal shifting against bone, a faint creak, like an old gate holding back a storm. The apple-giving woman steps forward, not with mint this time, but with a damp cloth. She holds it up, but the reeve shakes his head. When it's done, he says. She steps back, cloth folded again, like a patient thought. After another long moment and a half-turn more, the farmer blurts out a sum less than the tithe, more than nothing. The reeve nods once to the blacksmith, who pauses but doesn't release. All of it, the reeve says, and the collector gets his rake back. There's a pause, then a grudging yes. Only then does the handle reverse the pressure, loosening by degrees. The top loop lifts away, and the farmer pulls his leg back as though it weighs twice what it did an hour ago. Red marks stripe the shin where the pegs pressed. They'll fade, but the memory will not. Willem tilts his head toward you. Better than losing the whole leg, he says. You nod because the scale here is always better than something worse. Joke 2. You decide the town should install a sign, "Welcome to our square." We do comparative mercy. The blacksmith wipes the pegs with oil the way a man might clean a tool after honest work. The beetle returns the boot to its cart. The reeve announces the arrangement, the tithe in full by week's end, a public apology at the church porch, and a ban on keeping rakes in the house for one season. The last one earns a few chuckles. The reeve's fringe doesn't twitch. The apple-giving woman finally presses the damp cloth to the farmer's shin. He flinches, then exhales, looking for a moment like someone who has just stepped out of the river after a long day. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. As the crowd disperses, you stay a moment looking at the empty boot on the cart. Without a leg in it, it seems almost inanimate, like a door hinge or a barn latch. But you know better now. You've seen how quickly still things can learn to speak when someone's inside them. Walking home, you feel the ghost of the pegs on your own legs, each step a reminder of how close the shin sits to the surface. You pass the ditch and wonder how many stones came from wheelbarrows, how many from hands that had once been in stocks or collars or boots. The sky finally lets go a thin rain, and you let it spot your shins without flinching. Joke 3. You almost thank the rain for being the only thing in town today that touches without demanding an answer. By the time you reach your door, the clouds have darkened, but your pace has steadied. You pour water, rest your legs against the table, and think about the tools in the shed, waiting for the next name on the reeve's list. Tonight, at least your name isn't there. By the time word reaches you, the forge has already been stoked to that steady orange that makes shadows retreat. You take the long way to the council hall, past the ditch, now glinting with stones you delivered past the market cross, where the drummer boy's fingers still tap ghosts of rhythm, past the herb stall with its small, insistent republic of mint. The air tastes metallic, like a penny pressed to the tongue, a flavor you know means iron has been asked to speak. On the trestle inside the hall sits something you haven't seen before. It looks at first glance like a mace the sort of ugly flower knights daydream about smashing, but the head is hollow and studded with tiny holes arranged in patterns, circles, short slits, a little rosette on one face, as if someone with a sense of humor decorated a problem. A removable plug sits at the top. A long handle makes it easy to keep a polite distance from whatever escapes the head. The blacksmith lifts it with a careful, two-handed respect you recognize from brazier days. "Sprinkler," he says, voice flat. "For pitch oil." "Metal." He doesn't need to say which. We all hear the rest. They bring in the prisoner flanked by guards, a town courier with ink still under the nails, accused of passing sealed letters to a rival lord. Treason in a village mouth is a very big word. It rolls around, collects pebbles, and grows heavier each time someone says it. The reeve's fringe is subdued, as if even it understands this is not a day for grandstanding. Willem appears at your shoulder, arms crossed, wearing the expression he saves for devices that feel less like props and more like ultimatums. Mainstream historical fact walks in with the clerk ink on cuffs as always. He pitches his voice softly the way he does when the room runs hot. The Spanish Inquisition, famous for its cruelties and rumor, left detailed records. Their staple tools were the garrucha strapado, the toca water, and the rack. Pitch and metal appear in sensational catalogs much later, often in 19th century chambers of horrors built to shock visitors. He glances at the iron flower. Devices like this lead sprinkler show up in those collections, sometimes described as aspersoria, a word also used for holy water. Whether actual tribunals used molten lead routinely, historians still argue. His eyebrow tilts. You can hear the quotation marks around routinely. Still here in this hall, the tool is real enough to feel heavy from across the room. The blacksmith lifts the plug, sets it aside, and nods to the assistant at the small side forge, where a crucible sits like a sleeping comet. You notice a second pot, two thicker, pitch dark, breathing a shallow, sticky reek. The town hedges its bets, oil, pitch, metal. The reeve says in a voice trying to be a law and a lullaby at once, confess names. Swear to the council, or we mark you with a lesson you'll carry longer than a song. The courier swallows. You see that look you've seen at the rope eyes doing the math of breath, and at the knee screw hands wanting to guard the joint that can't be guarded. You feel oddly a river-cool thought slide over you. Look away if you must, but count your own breathing if you stay. They choose pitch first. The clerk, duty-bound to footnote, murmurs that pitch drips, slower, clings, more hides, less in the air with drama that could tip a room into panic. The apple-giving woman, she's here of course, stands near the doorway with a small bowl of water, and you spot it, a sprig of mint tucked in her sleeve. It is her superstition now as much as yours. Joke 1, you briefly imagine a guild seal, mint, and memory purveyors of complicated comfort. Since last Tuesday. The beetle tilts the crucible. The blacksmith steadies the sprinkler's mouth, and the tarry darkness pours into the hollow head with a sound like a whisper sliding under a door. The plug goes back on. A breath. The reeve directs the courier's sleeve to be rolled up to the elbow. No theater of large wounds today. This town is trying to thread a needle called lesson. The blacksmith lifts the iron flower, and for a second, you think of the whirligig's cage spinning. Both are circles demanding a body's attention. He gives the sprinkler a small shake. The first drops gather at the holes, fat and reluctant. They fall in slow punctuation along the forearm, 4, then 3, then 2, a scatter of glossy beads that cool fast and harden with embarrassing speed. The courier's breath hitches. He keeps his jaw closed around any sound and instead closes his eyes the way people do when they want to fold inward. You count quietly to 4, then to 6, lending him the rhythm you learned under ropes and on beams, and with a bridle's stub reminding you to choose your words sparingly. The reeve repeats his question. The courier shakes his head. That is a brave kind of no, you think, given the parade of yeses you've seen around this square. The blacksmith tips the sprinkler again, this time rotating the rosette face so the droplets land finer, more like rain with opinions. The courier mutters a name, then another. The beetle nods to the assistant, and the pitch pot is set aside. Leads someone near the back, whispers, and the word is heavier than anything you've heard spoken under this roof. The clerk mutters another fact more for the room than himself. Molten lead melts at a temperature that makes use a tricky business for interrogations, despite the books. A droplet, if used, would be smaller than ballads suggest. More threat than practice most days. Historians still argue whether devices like this were built to be used or displayed as warnings, theater standing in for act. That debate hums on the edge of your hearing now, like the hush before a drumbeat that never quite starts. The assistant lifts the crucible with tongs. The metal inside is shyly bright, the surface skimming over, opening, skimming again. The blacksmith does not rush. He is the kind of craftsman who hates spectacle even as he maintains the town's supply of it. Willem's mouth twitches toward you. If they do, it will be a pinprick, not a river. You nod, grateful to have that scale inside your head. The Reeve's voice drops half a tone. Names, routes, the sign you leave on the gate. The courier's eyes flick to the panel of canvases in the corner, the judge and his chair, the painted lesson that has sat like a silent juror over so many town days. You can practically hear the painting breathe, choose. The blacksmith steadies the sprinkler, the assistant tips the crucible, and a single bright bead disappears inside. With a sigh, you feel more than hear. The blacksmith waits a beat to let the heat settle, then he brings the rosette over the skin wrist now, where veins tell their soft truths, and you watch the courier's face more than his arm. The iron tilts. One bead from one hole, quick as a midge, lands and becomes history. The courier's breath leaves in a sound, between a laugh and a sob, an involuntary thing that isn't any word you know. He speaks then not in a flood, but in a steady, miserable stream, names a route by the willow where you counted a rope dancer's steps, the shutter with stale ale paint by the council door. He gives a sign you wouldn't have recognized as a sign. The beetle's slate fills. The blacksmith hands the sprinkler back to the assistant with a swiftness that reads as relief. Joke 2, small and private in your head, the sprinkler belongs in a garden watering cabbages, and nobody will fund that pilot program. Quirky tidbit lands like a feather from the clerk. Some surviving sprinklers in cabinets of curiosities have holy water origins, actual aspersoria for blessings, later reinterpreted by showmen as engines of torment. One even has little flowers punched in the head like yours, which suggests a craftsman with either piety, whimsy, or an odd sense of branding. The clerk's mouth bends. We inherit objects, and then we inherit the stories we tell with them. The Reeve sets the terms like a carpenter setting a brace. The courier will guide a squad to collect the letters, face a formal hearing, and accept banishment if confirmed. There is no talk of more iron today. The apple-giving woman steps quick, places water to the lips, mint to the wrist, green over gray, her rituals refusing to become blunted by repetition. Willem touches the trestle, once a carpenter's benediction for ugly furniture. You step back into the corridor and breathe the cooler air there like a favor. On the wall hangs a row of tools you've come to know by silhouette, the heretic's forks, forked stubbornness, the bridle's tidy arcs, the collar's unmoving circle. Somewhere outside, the whirligig slips in its pulley, a polite squeak. The drum boy taps a rail with 2 fingers, dum dum dum, then stops as if remembering today isn't a drum day. You walk home slowly, feeling the town's inventory inside you, like a drawer of carefully nested spoons, river cold, bridle bite, barrel scratch, mare ridge, cat crack, brand glow, maiden hum, wheel geometry, drum cadence, whirligig spin, collar weight, knee thread, rope air, boot pegs, sprinkler drop. You don't recite them aloud. You don't need to. Your body knows the list now. Joke 3, you tell yourself gently, like a bedtime promise, that if anyone ever offers you a spa day featuring traditional medieval treatments, you're going to ask exactly which century and who's on mint duty. At your door, you pause. The room smells of wood and wool and the mint you left in a cup like a house guardian. You wash your hands, slow watch water slide over them and disappear. Then you sit. The chair holds. The air is free. The night, for once, keeps its own counsel without asking you to hold any of it up. You let the square fade to a gentle blur, its hard edges rounding off until they feel like pebbles warmed in a palm. The instruments of the day, iron and wood rope and wheel, step back into their places the way tools do when the daylight doesn't need them anymore. The forge breathes lower, the brazier dims to the color of tea, and even the reeve's fringe settles as the breeze loses interest. You breathe with the room. In for the count. You like longer out, so your shoulders slip a notch lower, and your tongue forgets to hold itself ready. The memory of cold water unwinds into a soft stream. You hear rather than feel the river, choosing to be a lullaby for once, not a verdict. Somewhere the whirligig gives a single drowsy squeak more cupboard than carnival. Somewhere a drumstick taps a windowsill twice, then decides quiet is the better rhythm. You let the faces pass by at the speed of leaves in a slow current. Willem leaning like punctuation at the end of a sentence, the apple-giving woman tucking green into whatever bruise the day invented the clerk, with his careful ink and kinder asides. No need to keep them crisp. Let them soften and drift toward the comfortable middle distance where stories sleep. If a thought wanders toward a hard picture, the bright bead, the tight rope, the narrow beam, you let breath turn it into something smaller and farther away. You practice that old trick. Imagine a door closing with a well-oiled hinge, a room aired out by a window you open just a hand's width. Outside the window is a square that has learned for tonight only to move lightly. Inside is you and the chair that fits, and a fan or no fan, and the quiet that comes when nobody asks you to perform. You can let your hands be simple hands, now not ledgers. Let your feet be just feet, not witnesses. Let your chest remember the ease of air that belongs to you. The mint in the cup gives off a faint sweetness, nothing more, and that is enough to say the day has tilted toward kind. So the lights can dim the last little bit. The room can round itself into a soft corner. And you can let your eyes rest the way a book rests when you lay it face down with something to look forward to tomorrow. Sleep finds you like a blanket smoothed by a friend who knows the edges you prefer, and the square mercifully fades to the hush it keeps for safekeeping. End of script. Sweet dreams.